I trusted that man with a key to my house. Let that sink in for a second. For 12 years, Dave Marsden lived 6 feet from my driveway, separated by a low brick wall and a strip of privet hedge. He came to every barbecue. He watched my kids grow up. He helped me carry my mother-in-law's coffin. And the entire time he was stealing from me. My name's Paul. I'm 44. I live in a cul-de-sac in Roundhay, Leeds with my wife Sarah and our 2 boys, 13 and 10. I'm a plumber by trade. I run a white van, keep my tools organized, and I don't ask much from the world except to be left alone on a Sunday with the football and a cold lager. I'm not dramatic. I'm not the type to cause a scene. But what Dave Marsden did to me, what he did to my family, changed something in me that I don't think I'll ever get back. It started small. So small, I blamed myself. A cordless drill went missing from my van in late September. I'd left the back unlocked, stupid I know, and I figured I'd been careless. Bought a replacement, 40 quid from Screwfix. Life moved on. Then in October, a parcel disappeared from the front step. Amazon said delivered, but nothing was there. I filed a claim, got a refund, and chalked it up to one of those things. Then another parcel. Then a full jerry can of petrol I kept by the garage for the mower. Then a set of socket wrenches. Sarah noticed it before I took it seriously. She said, "Paul, that's 5 things in 2 months. Something's not right." And she was right. I started locking everything, bringing parcels inside the second they arrived. But the feeling lingered, that creeping sense that someone was watching, waiting, timing it perfectly. So, in November, I bought a camera. Tiny little thing, motion activated, 60 quid off Amazon. I mounted it under the eave, above the garage, angled down at the driveway. Didn't tell anyone. Not Sarah, not the boys, not the neighbors. I just wanted to know. 3 days later, I had my answer. It was a Tuesday. I was on a job in Harrogate, wouldn't be back until 5. The camera pinged my phone at 11:47 a.m. I opened the app during my tea break, expecting a cat or a delivery driver. Instead, I watched Dave Marsden, my neighbor, my mate, the man I'd had round for Christmas drinks 2 weeks earlier, walk calmly up my driveway, open my unlocked van, take a pipe cutter and a bag of copper fittings, tuck them under his jacket, and walk back to his own front door. He didn't rush. He didn't look around nervously. He moved like a man who'd done this 100 times. I sat in that van in Harrogate for 20 minutes just staring at the screen. I replayed it 4 times. I felt sick. Genuinely physically sick. Not because of the pipe cutter that was 30 quid. It was the casualness. The comfort. The way he knew my schedule well enough to time it when I was 40 miles away. I didn't tell Sarah that night. I needed to think. I barely slept. I lay there running through every interaction I'd had with Dave over 12 years, re-examining every smile, every wave, every time he'd leaned over the wall and said, "All right, Paul." I started wondering how long it had been going on. Was it months, years? How much had he taken that I'd never even noticed? The next morning, I watched him leave for work. He saw me on the driveway and gave me his usual nod. "Cold one today, mate," he said. I nodded back. My hands were shaking. I went to the police first, showed them the footage. The officer was sympathetic but honest. For items under a certain value with a first-time report, they'd likely issue a community resolution. A conversation, maybe a caution. He said I could confront Dave directly or let them handle it. I chose to handle it myself. That was probably my first mistake. I knocked on his door that Friday evening. His wife Karen answered, all smiles. "Oh, hiya, Paul. Come in. Dave's just in the kitchen." I walked through their hallway, a hallway I'd walked through dozens of times, and found Dave making a cup of tea. He turned around and said, "All right, mate, want a brew?" I said, "No, I want my pipe cutter back, and my drill, and my socket set, and everything else you've taken off my driveway." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Karen froze in the doorway behind me. Dave's face went through about 6 expressions in 2 seconds, confusion, then recognition, then fear, then something cold and hard that I'd never seen before. He put the mug down slowly and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I showed him the video on my phone, held it right up to his face, and I watched every excuse die behind his eyes. He didn't apologize. That's what still gets me. He didn't say sorry. He said, "It's not what it looks like." Then he said, I was going to bring it back. Then he said, you've got loads of gear, Paul. You wouldn't even miss it. Each excuse worse than the last. Karen started crying. Not because of what he'd done, because she was embarrassed. I was there in her kitchen making a scene. I kept my voice level. I said, Dave, I've got you on camera. Multiple times. I've already been to the police. I'm giving you one chance to return everything and we never speak again. He snapped. Just like that, the mask came off completely. He called me a grass. Said I was overreacting. Said real mates don't go to the police over a few bits and bobs. Then he said something that made my blood go cold. He said, you think you're better than everyone on this street, don't you? With your new van and your fancy barbecue and your perfect little family? That's when I realized it wasn't opportunism. It was resentment. 12 years of smiling at me while something toxic festered underneath. I left without raising my voice. I went home, sat Sarah down and told her everything. She cried. Not about the tools, about the betrayal. About Karen, who she'd considered a close friend. About the barbecues and the shared school runs and the Christmas cards. All of it contaminated now. Within 48 hours, the whole cul-de-sac knew. Not because I told them, because Dave told them first, spinning his own version. According to him, I'd barged into his home, threatened him in front of his wife, and was trying to destroy his reputation over a misunderstanding. He went door to door. He actually went door to door. And here's the thing about a cul-de-sac. It's a closed system. There's no neutral ground. People had to pick sides, and some of them picked his. Janet and Roger at number 7 said, I should have handled it privately. Mike at number 3 said the camera was an invasion of privacy. An invasion of privacy. I filmed my own driveway. But then the truth started leaking out. Because Dave hadn't just been stealing from me. Linda at number 9 realized her missing garden trimmer hadn't been taken by a passing teenager. Tom at number 12 checked his own garage and found tools missing he'd written off months ago. One by one, people started comparing notes, and a pattern emerged. Dave had been helping himself to anything unsecured across the entire street, probably for years. Then Karen left him, moved back to her mother's in Wakefield. And when she left, the real story came out through a mutual friend. Dave was nearly 40,000 pounds in debt. Credit cards, loans, a gambling habit he'd hidden from everyone. He'd been selling stolen tools and equipment online to cover minimum payments. The copper fittings he took from my van, worth about 200 quid to a scrap dealer. That's what 12 years of friendship was worth. 200 quid and a Betfair account. The police eventually charged him. Theft by finding they called some of it. Straight theft for the rest. He pleaded guilty at the magistrate's court in January. Got a 12-month community order and a fine he'll never pay. He still lives next door. That's the part people can't believe when I tell this story. He still lives at number 5. I still see him every morning. He doesn't wave anymore. Doesn't speak. Just gets in his car with his head down and drives off to whatever's left of his life. The cul-de-sac never recovered. Not really. The barbecues stopped. The group chat went quiet. People are polite but guarded now, and there's a tension that hums beneath every interaction like an electrical current. Trust is like that. Once it breaks in a small community, it doesn't just break between two people. It breaks everywhere. I got my drill back, by the way. He left it on my doorstep in a Tesco bag the day after I confronted him. 40 quid. That's what started all of this. 40 quid and a man who smiled at me every morning while he picked my life apart one tool at a time. I don't leave my van unlocked anymore. I don't leave parcels on the step. And I don't trust the people who smile the widest. Not anymore. My father died on a Tuesday. I know that because I was sorting the second delivery on Kirkstall Road when my phone buzzed, and I remember thinking it was probably a scam text because nobody ever called me. Nobody had called me in years. His name was Gerald Whitmore. He was 78. He'd lived in the same house in Headingley for 40 years, and I hadn't set foot inside it in over a decade. That wasn't my choice, not entirely, but I'll get to that. I'm a postal worker. Have been for 16 years. I wake up at 3:30, I sort letters, I walk my round, I come home to a one-bedroom flat above a chippy in Armley, and I eat something from a tin. That's my life. That was my life before the solicitor's letter arrived, and honestly, I expected it to be my life after. I was wrong. The letter came 3 weeks after the funeral. A funeral I wasn't invited to, by the way. My sister Denise handled the arrangements, and she told the family I was in no fit state to attend. I found out he was in the ground from a cousin's Facebook post. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for an hour. Not because I'd lost him a long time ago, but because someone had stolen my chance to say goodbye, and I knew exactly who. The solicitor was a woman named Patricia Oakes, small office on Park Row. She sat me down, offered me a cup of tea, and told me my father had left me everything. And when I say everything, I mean a property portfolio worth £2.3 million, 6 houses, 6 rental properties across Leeds and Bradford that my father had quietly accumulated over 30 years, remortgaging, reinvesting, building something brick by brick, while I thought he was just a retired bus driver living on his pension. Patricia watched my face and said, "He updated this will 14 months ago. He was very specific about his wishes. He wanted you to have it all." I asked about Denise. Patricia paused, and her pause told me everything. Your sister's not mentioned in the will. Your father was quite clear about that. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick, because I knew what was coming. Denise is 7 years older than me. She moved back into Dad's house in 2011 after her second divorce, and she positioned herself as his carer. And look, at first maybe it was genuine. Dad had a bad hip. He needed help around the house. But Denise didn't just help. She installed herself. She became the gatekeeper. Every time I tried to visit, there was a reason I couldn't. Dad's having a bad day. Dad's asleep. Dad doesn't want to see you right now. She'd call me and say things like, "He gets agitated when you come around, you know that." And eventually I believed her. I stopped trying. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't feel like manipulation when it's happening. It feels like you're being reasonable. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until the probate proceedings, was that Denise had been siphoning Dad's pension for over a decade. She'd set up a direct debit from his account into hers. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $300 there, but by the end, it was nearly the full amount. She was taking almost $1,500 a month. She told him it was for household bills. She told the family she was sacrificing her own life to look after him. She was bleeding him dry. When Denise found out about the will, she didn't cry. She didn't grieve. She lawyered up within 48 hours. Her solicitor filed a challenge under the Mental Capacity Act, claiming Dad lacked the cognitive ability to make a valid will. And here's where it gets truly ugly. She produced medical documents, letters supposedly from Dad's GP, suggesting he'd been diagnosed with moderate dementia 18 months before the will was signed. They were forged. I didn't know that yet, but they were forged. She had taken legitimate NHS letterhead from correspondence in Dad's house and fabricated the content. She'd done it carefully, professionally, like someone who'd been planning for this possibility. But the documents were only half her strategy. The other half was me. Denise started calling every aunt, uncle, and cousin in the family. She told them I had a drug problem. She said I'd been using heroin for years, that I'd stolen money from Dad in the past, that the reason Dad cut me off was because I'd turned up at his house off my head and threatened him. None of it was true. Not a single word. I've never touched drugs in my life. I barely drink. But Denise knew something fundamental about family dynamics. People believe the person who's already in the room. She'd been there for a decade playing the devoted daughter, and I'd been absent. So when she told them I was an addict, they had no reason to doubt her. My cousin Mark sent me a message saying, "You should be ashamed of yourself taking money from a dying man." My Auntie Joan blocked me on everything. People I'd known my entire life looked at me like I was something scraped off a shoe. I sat in my flat above that chippy, surrounded by the smell of frying oil, and I genuinely considered walking away from 2.3 million pounds just to make it stop. Patricia Oakes told me not to. She said, "Your father wanted this. If you walk away, she wins, and she's already been winning for years." So I didn't walk away. The probate court proceedings dragged on for 11 months. 11 months of my life consumed by affidavits and witness statements and legal fees I was paying with money I didn't have, putting it all on credit cards because the estate was frozen. Denise's solicitor was aggressive, theatrical, painting me as this predatory figure who'd swooped in on a confused old man. But then Patricia did something brilliant. She subpoenaed Dad's actual medical records directly from the GP surgery. There was no dementia diagnosis. There never had been. Dad's GP confirmed he'd seen Gerald Whitmore regularly until 6 months before his death, and at no point had there been any concern about his mental capacity. The letters Denise had produced didn't match any records held by the surgery. The fonts were wrong, the reference numbers didn't exist. When this was presented to the court, Denise's solicitor asked for an adjournment. You could see it on his face. He hadn't known. She'd lied to her own lawyer, but it was the bank statements that finished her. Patricia had requested a full financial audit of Dad's accounts as part of the estate proceedings, and what came back was devastating. 12 years of systematic transfers. Over £140,000 moved from Dad's account into Denise's. No invoices, no care agreements, no receipts. Just money disappearing month after month while she told everyone she was sacrificing everything to look after him. And buried in Dad's paperwork in a drawer in his bedroom, Patricia's team found a handwritten note. It wasn't part of the will, it had no legal standing, but the judge allowed it to be read into the record. It said, "To my son David, I am sorry I let her keep you away. I was weak and I was afraid. This is all I can do now. Please forgive an old man who should have been braver." I couldn't breathe when they read that out. I sat in that courtroom in my post office fleece because I'd come straight from my shift, and I put my hand over my mouth, and I tried not to fall apart in front of strangers. The judge upheld the will in its entirety. He noted the deeply troubling evidence of financial abuse and referred the forged documents to the police. Denise was escorted out by her solicitor, who dropped her as a client that same afternoon. She was never charged with fraud. The CPS decided it wasn't in the public interest, whatever that means. But she lost everything that mattered to her, the family's sympathy, the narrative she'd built, the money she'd been skimming. Last I heard, she was living in a housing association flat in Morley, telling anyone who'd listen that she'd been robbed of her inheritance. The family hasn't apologized. Not Mark, not Auntie Joan, not any of them. A few have quietly unblocked me. Nobody said sorry. I don't think they will. I still work at the post office. I kept my round. I bought a proper flat, nothing flashy, just somewhere that doesn't smell like chip fat. The properties are managed by a letting agency now, and every month the rent comes in, and every month I think about my dad sitting in that house with her writing that note, knowing exactly what she was, and not being able to stop it. He couldn't fight her while he was alive. So he fought her from the grave. And he won. I spent 41 years surveying land in East Tennessee. 41 years walking property lines, driving stakes, reading the earth like a book most people don't even know exists. So when I tell you I know where my property ends and my neighbor's begins, I need you to understand that's not an opinion. That's a fact, carved into the bedrock of everything I am. I retired in 2021. Bought a nice 3-acre parcel outside Greeneville, up against the foothills. Quiet place. Old Hardwoods, a creek that runs year-round, a view of the Smokies from my back porch that makes you forget the world's gone sideways. My wife Carol, she passed 2 years before, and I wanted somewhere I could just be still. Just exist for a while without anyone needing anything from me. I got about 14 months of that peace. Then Trent Ballard moved in next door. Now Ballard wasn't some regular guy buying a house. He was a developer. Had his fingers in half the residential projects in Greene County. Built subdivisions, flipped commercial lots, sat on the planning commission for 6 years before term limits finally pushed him out. The kind of man who shakes your hand while his other hand is in your back pocket. He bought the adjacent property in March of 2022 and immediately started renovating. Tore out the old landscaping, brought in heavy equipment, started grading the backyard. I didn't think much of it at first. Man's got a right to improve his own land. But then one morning in June, I walked my property line the way I always do, old habits, and I stopped dead. The chain link fence that had separated our properties for at least 20 years had been pulled up and reset. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just 8 feet further onto my side. 8 feet doesn't sound like much until you realize it runs 160 feet along the back boundary. That's nearly 1,300 square feet of my land. And right there, on what was now supposedly his side, concrete forms were already going in for a pool deck. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I went to talk to him first. I'm not unreasonable. I walked over, knocked on his door, told him calmly that his fence was off the mark. He smiled at me the way you smile at a confused old dog. Told me I must be mistaken. Said he'd had the property surveyed before closing and everything was exactly where it should be. Then he offered me a beer like that was going to make it all go away. I declined the beer. I went home and pulled out my own copy of the plat I'd reviewed before I bought my place. Clear as day, the boundary was where I knew it was. 8 feet from where his new fence sat. So the next morning I drove to the Greene County Register of Deeds to pull the original plat records. They weren't there. The clerk, a young woman who seemed genuinely confused, told me the file for my parcel's subdivision plat had been checked out and never returned. No record of who took it, no sign-out sheet, just gone. I asked about the digital backup. She said the system had been migrated 2 years prior and some older records hadn't transferred correctly. Now a normal person might have panicked. Might have hired a lawyer right then and started throwing money at the problem. But I'm not a normal person. I'm a surveyor. And a surveyor doesn't panic when records go missing. A surveyor goes deeper. I started with the state archives in Nashville. Took me a full day's drive and 3 hours in a basement that smelled like mildew and forgotten history. But I found the original 1,987 subdivision plat on microfilm. Clear, legible, and absolutely unambiguous about where my property line fell. I had certified copies made. Then I went further back. Found the 1,923 deed that described the original parcel before subdivision, referencing iron pins and old oak trees, 2 of which were still standing on my land. I cross-referenced that with USGS topographic surveys from the 1940s. Every single source agreed. While I was building my paper trail, Ballard's pool deck was going up fast. Concrete poured pavers, laid a beautiful stone-capped retaining wall. $60,000 of construction, easy. All of it sitting on my dirt. I bought a drone. Taught myself to fly it in an afternoon. I'm old, not stupid. Started documenting everything from the air. Timestamp footage showing the original fence post holes still visible in the grass. The new fence line, the construction progress. I flew that drone every 3 days for 2 months. Built a visual record that would make a forensic analyst weep with joy. Then I did something that changed everything. I pulled Ballard's building permits. His pool deck permit referenced a site plan. That site plan showed the property boundary exactly where his new fence was, 8 feet onto my land. The site plan had been approved by the county zoning office, signed off by a man named Dale Hutchins, who happened to be the current zoning administrator and who also happened to have been Ballard's business partner on a strip mall development in 2018. I sat at my kitchen table that night with all of it spread out in front of me. The certified plats, the century-old deeds, the drone footage, the permit records, the business connection between Ballard and Hutchins. And I felt something I hadn't felt since Carol died. Purpose. I hired an attorney. Not a local one, I went to Knoxville. Found a woman named Patricia Reeves who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for being absolutely merciless in court. I showed her everything. She looked at it for about 20 minutes, then looked up at me and said, "Mr. Hardin, this man is going to wish he'd never heard your name." We filed suit in Chancery Court. Trespass, encroachment, and fraudulent alteration of public records. But Patricia added something I hadn't even considered. She invoked Tennessee Code Annotated 282101, a provision in the adverse possession statute that most people read as protecting long-term possessors. She flipped it, used it to establish that because I had maintained continuous documented use of that strip of land for over 2 years before the fence was moved, mowing it, walking it, keeping it clear, Ballard couldn't claim any possessory right, even if the records had supported him, which they didn't. Ballard hired a big firm out of Johnson City. They came in confident, filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the boundary dispute was a simple surveying disagreement. The judge denied the motion in 11 minutes. Discovery was where it got ugly. Patricia subpoenaed Ballard's entire permit history going back 10 years. Every project, every approval, every interaction with the zoning board. What came out was a pattern so brazen it made the judge visibly angry. Ballard had received expedited approvals on 7 different projects, all signed off by Hutchins. 2 of those projects had boundary descriptions that didn't match county records. One had a setback variance granted without the required public hearing. The missing plat from the Register of Deeds digital access logs showed that someone using a county employee login had accessed that file's record 4 days before it disappeared. The login belonged to a clerk in Hutchins' office. In open court, under oath, Hutchins tried to claim he didn't recall approving Ballard's site plan. Patricia put the signed document in front of him. Then she put his business partnership records next to it. Then she played my drone footage showing the original fence post holes measured and annotated, proving the line had been moved. Hutchins looked at Ballard across the courtroom. Ballard wouldn't look back. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. Full restoration of the property line. And because Ballard had knowingly built a permanent structure on land he knew wasn't his using permits, he knew were fraudulently obtained, the court ordered complete demolition of the pool deck at his expense. Every paver, every footing, every inch of that $60,000 monument to arrogance torn out and hauled away. He also referred the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into the missing public records. Last I heard, Hutchins resigned quietly. Ballard's development company lost 2 pending project approvals while the investigation played out. I watched them demolish the deck on a Tuesday morning in October. Stood on my porch with a cup of coffee. Didn't gloat. Didn't wave. Just watched. Ballard put his house on the market 3 weeks later. People ask me if it was worth it. The months of work, the legal fees, the stress. And I tell them the same thing every time. A man who won't defend his boundaries doesn't have any. Carol knew that about me. It's why she married me. And it's why every evening I still walk my property line. Every single inch of it. I got a letter in my mailbox on a Tuesday telling me my mailbox was wrong. Not broken. Not falling over. Not offensive. Just wrong. Non-compliant. With Section 14, subsection 3B of the Ridgecrest Villas Homeowners Association Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. My mailbox, the one that came with the house when I bought it 6 years ago, was apparently 3/4 of an inch too tall and painted in a shade of black that wasn't the approved shade of black. The fine was $200 per week until corrected. And that's how I met the real Gerald Pruitt. Everybody in the neighborhood knew Gerald. Retired insurance adjuster. 63 years old. Khaki shorts, white New Balance sneakers, clipboard always tucked under his arm like he was conducting a building inspection on the Hoover Dam. He'd been HOA president for about 18 months by the time that letter landed in my allegedly criminal mailbox, and for most of that time, people thought he was just annoying. Fussy. The kind of guy who'd measure your grass with a ruler and feel righteous about it. But Gerald wasn't fussy. Gerald was strategic. And I was too busy working 2 jobs and raising my daughter alone to see what he was actually doing until he came for me. 6 months before the mailbox letter, Gerald had proposed installing a gated entry system for our subdivision. Not a simple arm gate. A full decorative wrought iron automated gate with a guardhouse camera's keypad accessed the whole production. Price tag $85,000, funded through a special assessment that would cost every homeowner roughly $2,200. The vote was 31-19 against. I was one of the 31. I didn't have $2,200 lying around. I was stretching every paycheck to cover my mortgage, my daughter Lily's braces, and groceries that seemed to cost more every single month. I voted no, and I thought that was the end of it. It was the beginning. Within 3 months of that vote, 7 homeowners who'd voted no received violation notices. Barbara Chen got cited for a window AC unit that had been there for 4 years. Mark and David Ostrowski were fined for having a commercial vehicle in their driveway, Mark's work van, with a small plumbing logo on the door. The Wynns were told their backyard fence was 2 inches too close to the property line. Every single fine was steep. Every single one came with threatening language about liens and legal action. And every single recipient had voted against Gerald's gate. I didn't connect the dots at first. I was too busy panicking about my own situation. $200 a week. That's what Gerald was charging me for a mailbox. I called the management company the HOA used some outfit called Desert Peak Community Services and got a woman named Trish who sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. She told me I needed to submit a modification request to replace the mailbox with an approved model, wait for board approval, then complete the work within 30 days. The approved mailbox cost $180. The modification request fee was $75. And during the weeks I waited for approval, the fines would keep accumulating. I did the math on a napkin at my kitchen table and felt my stomach drop. By the time I could fix the problem, I'd owe over $1,000 in fines for a mailbox that had been perfectly fine for 6 years. That's when I started paying attention to the rest of the neighborhood. And that's when I noticed Carl Jessup's garage. Carl lived right next door to me. He and Gerald were tight. They went to the same church, played golf together on Saturdays. And Carl had been one of the 19 who'd voted yes on the gate. Carl had converted his 2-car garage into a living space about 8 months earlier. I'm talking drywall, carpet, a mini-split AC unit, the works. His nephew lived in there, no permits. No modification request. No approval from the HOA, and no fines. I walked past it every single day. The garage door was permanently sealed shut with weather stripping visible from the street. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. Gerald drove past it every time he did his little patrol around the neighborhood. He just didn't see it. Because he didn't want to. That realization changed something in me. I went from scared to angry in about 48 hours. I started knocking on doors. Not all of them, just the ones I knew had gotten violation notices. Barbara answered hers with red eyes like she'd been crying. The Ostrowskis were furious, but felt helpless. The Newens had already started talking to a lawyer, and every single one of them had voted no on the gate. I sat in Barbara's living room with 5 other homeowners, and we laid it all out on her dining table. Every notice, every fine, every date. The pattern was undeniable. Gerald Pruitt was using the CC and ours as a weapon, selectively enforcing rules against people who'd opposed him and ignoring identical or worse violations by his allies. I started documenting everything. I took photos of Carl's garage. I photographed another Yes Voters RV parked on the street for 3 weeks straight, a clear violation that went unnoticed. I found a house on Mesquite Lane with Christmas lights still up in April, owned by Gerald's golf buddy. No fines, no letters, nothing. Then I did something that changed the entire trajectory of this fight. I filed a public records request for the HOA's financial statements. Desert Peak Community Services was required to maintain them. Trish, the woman who'd rather be anywhere else, sent me a stack of PDFs that I printed out at the library because my printer was out of ink. I'm not an accountant. I sell insurance part-time and bartend weekends. But even I could see that the numbers didn't add up. The HOA collected roughly $96,000 a year in dues. The landscaping contract was $31,000. Insurance was about $8,000. Management fees were $12,000. That left around $45,000 for maintenance reserves and miscellaneous expenses. But the miscellaneous line item had ballooned to over $60,000 in the last fiscal year. $60,000 in miscellaneous expenses for a 150-home subdivision with a community pool and some shared landscaping. Where was that money going? I brought this to the next board meeting. Gerald ran those meetings like a courtroom. Robert's Rules of Order. Timed public comments. 3 minutes per speaker. I stood up with my printed spreadsheets and my photos, and I laid it out. I showed the selective enforcement. I showed Carl's garage. I showed the financial discrepancies. I asked calmly where $60,000 in miscellaneous expenses had gone. Gerald cut my microphone at 2 minutes and 47 seconds. He said my time was up. He said my claims were defamatory. He said if I continued to harass the board, the HOA would pursue legal action against me personally. Then he moved to adjourn the meeting. His 2 board allies, both yes voters on the gate, seconded and voted immediately. Meeting over. 19 people were still standing in that community room with their hands raised to speak. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on my back patio at 1 a.m. and thought about selling the house. Just giving up. Lily was asleep inside, and I thought about what it would mean to uproot her from her school, her friends, the only home she'd known since her dad left. I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and started writing emails. Within a week, I had 23 homeowners signed onto a formal petition to recall the entire board. Arizona law requires a special meeting if 10% of homeowners petition for one. We had more than 15%. We hand-delivered the petition to Desert Peak Community Services with a copy to Gerald's home address. He ignored it. He literally pretended it didn't exist. No meeting was scheduled. No acknowledgement was sent. So we hired a lawyer. The Newens attorney, a woman named Rachel Dominguez, who specialized in HOA disputes, agreed to represent the group at a reduced rate because her words, she'd been waiting for a case like this. Rachel sent a demand letter. Gerald's response through the HOA's attorney was that the petition was procedurally deficient because it used the wrong form. There was no required form. Rachel filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. She also subpoenaed the full financial records, not just the summaries I'd gotten, but the actual bank statements, invoices, and receipts. That's when everything fell apart for Gerald Pruitt. The bank statements showed direct transfers to Gerald's personal account totaling $41,000 over 2 years, The invoices for a pool resurfacing project were fabricated. The company listed didn't exist. The meeting minutes from 3 separate board sessions had been altered after the fact, changing vote tallies and removing motions that had been raised from the floor. Gerald hadn't just been a petty tyrant. He'd been stealing from us. From all of us. From the people who supported him and the people who didn't. He'd been writing himself checks from our dues and covering it up with fake paperwork. The recall election happened 6 weeks later, court-ordered, after Gerald tried to block it one final time. He was removed unanimously. Not 31-19. Unanimously. Even Carl Jessup voted to remove him. The new board, which I was asked to join and reluctantly agreed to, immediately waived all outstanding fines from Gerald's selective enforcement campaign. We filed a civil suit to recover the embezzled funds. Gerald's house went on the market 3 months later. Last I heard, he moved to Tucson. I still have the same mailbox. 3/4 of an inch too tall, painted in the wrong shade of black. Nobody said a word about it since. Lily asked me once what the whole thing was about, and I told her the truth, as simply as I could. Some people get a little bit of power, and they think it makes them important. It doesn't. It just makes them dangerous until someone decides to stop being afraid. I decided on a Tuesday, at 1 a.m, on my back patio, and I do it again. I want you to imagine something for me. You come home after a long day. You kick off your shoes. You walk into your bathroom. And your towel, the one you hung up dry that morning, is damp. Not soaking, not dripping, just damp. Like someone used it and tried to hang it back exactly the way you left it. Now imagine that happening again. And again. And again. For months. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm a paralegal in Chicago. I live alone in a mid-rise apartment in Logan Square, and for 7 months, a man I barely knew was living pieces of my life while I was at work. Eating my food, sleeping in my bed, showering with my soap, using my towels, and I had no idea. Not until I spent $23 on a nanny cam from Amazon and watched the footage on my lunch break. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with the towels. I work a hybrid schedule, 3 days in the office, 2 from home. My in-office days are Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'd leave by 7:30, get home around 6, and at least twice a week my bath towel would feel off. Not wet enough to be alarming. Just not right. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe condensation. Maybe the bathroom vent wasn't working well. Maybe I'd used it that morning and forgot. You rationalize. That's what we do. We tell ourselves the simple answer because the real answer is too insane to consider. Then the food started disappearing. Little things. A yogurt I was sure I'd bought. Leftovers that seemed to shrink. A sleeve of crackers that went from mostly full to half empty. I actually started a grocery list on my phone tracking what I bought because I thought I was losing my mind. I thought maybe I was stress eating and blacking it out. I Googled, can anxiety cause memory gaps around food? That's how far I went to avoid the obvious. Because the obvious was unthinkable. The thing that finally broke through my denial was the bed. I'm particular about my bed. I make it every single morning, hospital corners, pillows stacked a certain way, the decorative throw folded at the foot. It's my one neurotic ritual. And one Thursday evening in late October, I came home and the throw was folded wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just the crease was facing the other direction. like someone had picked it up and put it back but didn't know which way the fold went. I stood in my bedroom doorway staring at that blanket for a solid 5 minutes. And something cold crawled up the back of my neck. Because in that moment I knew. I didn't have proof yet, but my body knew before my brain would let me accept it. Someone had been in my apartment. I didn't call the police. What would I say? My towel is damp and my blanket is folded wrong. They'd think I was nuts. Instead, I ordered the cheapest motion-activated camera I could find, a little white cube barely bigger than a dice. I stuck it on the hallway bookshelf, angled toward the front door, half hidden behind a picture frame. I set it to record on motion and send clips to my phone. Tuesday morning I left for work at 7:30, like always. I got to the office, poured my coffee, opened my laptop. At 9:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I almost didn't look right away. I was in the middle of drafting a deposition summary, but something told me to open it. So I did. The clip was 11 seconds long. I watched a man walk into my apartment using a key. Not breaking in. Not jimmying the lock. He had a key. He walked in like he lived there. Casual. Comfortable. He was wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a plastic bag. I recognized him immediately. It was Victor. The building's maintenance supervisor. The guy who'd fixed my garbage disposal in March. The guy who smiled at me in the lobby and asked how my day was going. My hand started shaking. I set my phone down on my desk and just stared at the wall. Then I picked it up again and kept watching. Over the next 3 hours, the camera sent me 6 more clips. Victor walking into my bathroom. Victor opening my refrigerator and pulling out a container of leftover pasta. Victor sitting on my couch eating it while scrolling his phone. Victor walking down the hallway toward my bedroom. And then 40 minutes later, Victor walking back out, hair slightly damp, looking refreshed like a man who just had a lovely little break. He straightened a pillow on the couch. He rinsed the fork he'd used and put it back in the drawer. He checked the apartment one more time, nodded to himself and left. Locked the door behind him. He wasn't robbing me. He wasn't planting cameras. He wasn't doing anything violent. He was living in my apartment. Casually, routinely. Like it was a hotel he visited twice a week. I went to the bathroom at work and threw up. I called my building's management company that afternoon. I was calm at first. I explained what I'd found. I told them I had video. The woman on the phone, some property coordinator named Dana, asked me to email the footage, which I did. Then she put me on hold for 14 minutes. When she came back, she said, and I will never forget this, we're going to look into this internally and get back to you within 5 business days. 5 business days. A man had been entering my home, sleeping in my bed, and showering in my bathroom for the better part of a year, and they wanted 5 business days. I said no. I said I was calling the police, which I did. 2 officers came to my apartment that evening. I showed them every clip. I showed them my grocery tracking notes. I showed them the towel hanging in my bathroom that was once again damp. One of the officers, a younger guy, couldn't have been more than 25, looked genuinely disturbed. His partner just kept writing in his notebook without expression. They told me they'd file a report and that I should contact the management company about changing my locks. The locks. That's when it hit me. Victor had a master key. Not the one the building kept in a lockbox for emergencies, his own copy. One he'd made himself. One he was never authorized to have. He had access to every unit in the building. Every single one. I didn't sleep that night. I pushed my dresser in front of the door and lay in bed with every light on, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the mornings I'd left for work and he'd just walked right in. Thinking about him in my shower. Using my shampoo. The water running over his body in my bathtub. Laying his head on my pillow. Pulling my blanket over himself. eating food I'd cooked with my hands out of my containers with my forks. The intimacy of it made my skin crawl in a way I still can't fully articulate. It wasn't violent, but it was a violation so deep and so personal that I felt like my home had been hollowed out from the inside. Victor was fired 3 days later. Not arrested. Fired. The management company's attorney sent me a letter expressing concern and assuring me that appropriate personnel action had been taken. They offered to change my locks for free as if that was some grand gesture and not the absolute bare minimum. They also asked me in writing not to post about the incident on social media for the privacy of all parties involved. I hired a lawyer. A real one. Not a paralegal playing attorney, an actual tenants' rights lawyer who took one look at the footage and said, "This is a nightmare for them." The police eventually charged Victor with criminal trespass. Not burglary because he hadn't stolen anything of measurable value. Trespass. A misdemeanor. He pled out, got probation, and a fine. No jail time. For 7 months of breaking into a woman's home. My lawsuit against the management company is still pending. Discovery revealed that Victor had copied the master key at a hardware store using his employee access, and that the building had no audit system, no key tracking, no protocol for monitoring master key duplication. My lawyer says other tenants in the building have come forward since my story got out. 2 of them reported similar things: food missing, items moved, towels disturbed. They'd all dismissed it just like I had. I moved out 2 months ago. I broke my lease and paid the penalty because I couldn't spend one more night in that apartment. I couldn't walk past that bathroom without seeing him in it. I couldn't look at my bed without imagining him curled up under the covers, comfortable content like he belonged there. I live in a different neighborhood now. I have a deadbolt, a chain, a camera on every door, and I still check the towels every single time I come home. Every single time. And they're always dry. But I check anyway. Because once someone takes your sense of safety, you don't just get it back. You rebuild it slowly, one dry towel at a time. And some days, honestly, it still doesn't feel like enough. I changed the locks on my own house once. When I was 26, bought the place, first thing I did was swap out every lock because the previous owner was going through a messy divorce and I didn't trust that his ex wouldn't show up with a key. 14 years later, my sister did the same thing to me. Except she wasn't protecting the house from strangers. She was locking me out of it. Let me back up. My name's Greg. I'm 40 years old. I'm an electrician in Denver, and I've owned my house in Lakewood since 2010. 3 bedrooms, finished basement, small yard. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every wire in that place I've touched with my own hands. I know that house better than I know most people. My sister Dana is 3 years younger than me. She married a guy named Scott when she was 24. 2 kids, Mia, who's 9, and Jaden, who's 7. Scott wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't a great one either. Drank too much, couldn't hold a job for more than 18 months. When Dana called me last October crying, saying they were done, saying she'd filed, I wasn't surprised. I was relieved for her, honestly. She asked if she could stay with me. Just for a few weeks. Just until she figured things out. She said the apartment she'd been looking at fell through and she didn't want the kids sleeping on someone's couch. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She's my sister. The first week was fine. Dana kept the basement tidy, the kids were polite, she cooked dinner twice. I told her, take your time, no rush, just keep me in the loop on your apartment search. She nodded and thanked me and said I was the best brother in the world. Week 2, she stopped mentioning apartments. Week 3, packages started showing up at my door with her name on them. Week 4, I came home from work and there was a shoe rack in my hallway that I didn't buy. A decorative mirror on the wall by the front door. Stuff from Home Goods with the tag still on. I didn't say anything. I should have. But you don't want to be the guy who makes his divorced sister with 2 kids feel unwelcome. So I swallowed it. Then came the job in Fort Collins. It was a commercial rewire, a restaurant renovation, 4 days on site. I left on a Tuesday morning, told Dana I'd be back Friday evening. She said great, she'd watch the house. I remember she smiled when she said it. I got back Friday around 7. Put my key in the front door. It didn't turn. I tried again. Jiggled it. Nothing. I checked right key, right lock. But the lock wasn't the same lock. The hardware was different. Brushed nickel instead of the brass I'd installed myself. I stood there on my own porch for a full minute just staring at it because my brain couldn't process what was happening. I knocked. Dana opened the door with this look on her face like I was a neighbor stopping by. She said, "Oh, I had the locks changed. The old ones felt flimsy. Here, I got you a key," and she handed me a key. To my own house? I should have lost it right there. But I was tired. 4 days of pulling wire through old walls, my back was killing me, and the kids were sitting right there on the couch watching a movie. So I took the key and I said, "Dana, you can't just change the locks on someone else's house." She said, "I was trying to help. Relax." That Monday, I found out the rest. I was going through the mail, and there was a letter from Jefferson County Public Schools. Enrollment confirmation for Mia and Jaden. At the elementary school, 3 blocks from my house. Using my address as their home address. She hadn't asked me. Hadn't mentioned it. Just did it. When I confronted her, she said the kids needed stability, that she couldn't keep them bouncing around, and that since they were already living here, what was the big deal? The big deal. I told her she needed to start looking for a place. Seriously looking. I said I loved her and the kids, but this was my home and she was making decisions about it without me. She got quiet, then she got cold. Said I was being selfish. Said she had nowhere to go. Said the kids had already made friends. 2 days later, my phone started ringing. My mom called first. Then my Aunt Linda. Then my cousin Marcus. Then my other aunt, Patricia. One after another, all saying variations of the same thing. "Dana told us you offered her the house. She said you told her she could stay as long as she needed. She said, you're going back on your word." I could feel the blood draining from my face. She had called every single person in our family and told them a version of events that didn't happen. She'd painted this picture where I was the generous brother who'd open his home and now for no reason was trying to throw a mother and her children onto the street. My mother, my own mother, said to me, "Gregory, how could you do this to her after everything she's been through?" I tried to explain. Nobody wanted to hear it. When it's a woman with 2 kids versus a single guy with a 3-bedroom house, the math is already done in people's heads before you open your mouth. I could hear it in their voices. They'd already decided. I went home that night and told Dana she had 30 days. I was calm, I was direct. I said I'd help her find a place, I'd even cover first month's rent, but she needed to be out. She looked at me and said, "This is my home now too, Greg. You can't just kick us out." That's when I realized. This wasn't my sister being desperate. This was a plan. The locks, the school enrollment, the family phone tree, she was building a case. She was establishing residency. She knew exactly what she was doing. I called a lawyer the next morning. Sat in his office, feeling sick to my stomach while he explained Colorado tenant law to me. Dana had been living there for over 30 days. Even without a lease, even without paying rent, she had tenant rights. I couldn't just change the locks back. I couldn't move her stuff out. I had to go through a formal eviction process. Against my own sister. The eviction notice went out on a Thursday. Dana cried. The kids looked confused and scared, and that almost broke me. Almost. But then I remembered standing on my own porch with a key that didn't work, and I held firm. She fought it. Of course she fought it. She showed up to the hearing with a legal aid attorney and argued she'd been invited to live there indefinitely. She showed texts where I'd said, "Take your time and no rush." Her lawyer tried to frame those as an open-ended agreement. The judge saw through it. He asked Dana one question that ended everything. Did you have the homeowner's written permission to change the locks on his property? She said no. He asked if she had written permission to enroll her children using his address. She said no. He granted the eviction. She moved out on a Sunday in January. Didn't say a word to me. Loaded up a U-Haul with stuff, some of it hers, some of it mine. I didn't even fight over it and drove to my mom's house in Aurora. My mom still isn't speaking to me. Neither is my Aunt Linda. My cousin Marcus sent me a text that just said, "Cold-blooded and nothing else." At Christmas, I wasn't invited to the family dinner. First time in 40 years. Dana got an apartment in February. 2 bedrooms, subsidized housing. The kids are fine. She's fine. She landed on her feet, which is what she would have done months earlier if she hadn't been so busy trying to land on mine. I changed the locks again after she left. Went back to brass. Installed a deadbolt and a camera system too. Some nights I sit in that basement where she stayed and I think about calling my mom. About explaining one more time. But I've learned something about family. They don't want the truth. They want the version that lets them sleep at night. And the version where the single guy gives up his house for the struggling mom, that's the one that lets everybody sleep. Everybody except me.
My husband John probably posted his side of the story somewhere. I'm sure in his version I'm a cheating, plotting monster who destroyed our marriage for no reason. He's the victim. The good guy who came home early to surprise his wife only to find her with another man. I know how it looks. But you don't know the whole story. You don't know what it's like to be erased little by little over 31 years. John and I have been married since we were 24. For all of those years, my life has revolved around his career. He works for a huge company, and his ambition has always been the engine of our family. When the company said jump, he asked how high, and I was the one who had to pack the boxes. We moved 4 times in our first 10 years together. Each time I left behind a job, I was just starting to like friends I had just made and the family I was already hundreds of miles away from. I did it because I loved him and because that's what a supportive wife does. 20 years ago, we made the big move from the East Coast all the way out to California for a major promotion for him. It was the hardest move of all. I was in my 30s, leaving everything I had ever known behind. But I put on a brave face, and I built a life. A real life. Not just as John's wife, the VP's wife who shows up to company dinners. I went back to school and got a certification in nonprofit management. I started a career here, one I'm incredibly proud of. I manage fundraising for a local children's charity. I have a team that depends on me. I have friends, real friends, who know me for times, me asterisk. We volunteer together, we have a book club, we support each other. For the first time in my marriage, I felt like a whole person, not just someone's other half. Then about 6 months ago, John came home with that look in his eye. The look he gets when a new rung on the corporate ladder appears. He was being considered for the top job, the big one. Executive Vice President. The only catch, it was back at headquarters. Back on the East Coast. He was so excited he didn't even see the color drain from my face. To him, this was the finish line, the victory lap of a long career. To me, it felt like a death sentence. Moving again at 55, leaving my job, my community, my entire world, the thought made me physically ill. I would have to start all over again looking for work in a city I hadn't lived in for 2 decades. I'd be a stranger again. I'd be back to being just the EVP's wife. I told him. I didn't scream or yell, I just sat him down and said, "John, I can't. I don't want to move." I explained everything, my job, my friends, the life I had built that was mine and mine alone. I told him that starting over now felt like being pushed back down to the bottom of a hill I had spent 20 years climbing. He listened, he nodded, but he didn't hear me. He heard a concern that could be managed. He said things like, "You can find a new job, you're great at that. And we'll make new friends, it'll be an adventure." He saw it as a logistical problem, not an existential crisis. He couldn't understand that he was asking me to give up my entire identity for his final trophy. For months we had the same conversation, over and over. Each time I felt more and more invisible. I realized my happiness and his ambition could no longer live in the same house. The week he flew back east for his final round of interviews was hell. The dread was a physical weight on my chest. I knew when he came back with a job offer in hand, it would be the point of no return. I would have to make a choice. And for the first time in 31 years, I was going to choose myself. The day he was supposed to be flying home, I woke up and couldn't breathe. The thought of making the bed, of tidying the kitchen, of pretending it was a normal day felt like a complete lie. The bed stayed a rumpled mess, a perfect picture of how I felt inside. I was paralyzed. I needed to talk to someone, but who? My kids would try to find a compromise, and my other friends were all our friends. I needed someone who was just times my times friend. So I called Sam. Sam is a dear friend from my charity board. He's 60, a widower, and one of the kindest men I know. His wife passed away a few years ago, and he understands what it feels like to lose a part of yourself. He's my friend in my world, and he always just listens. I asked if he could come over. I told him I was falling apart and I needed to talk before John got home. He came right over. I was a wreck. To keep my hands from shaking, I started cooking. I just grabbed things from the fridge and started making an elaborate dinner, something complicated to focus on. It was pure anxiety cooking. I chopped and stirred and tried to work through the speech I knew I had to give to John. Sam sat at the kitchen counter while I worked, and I just poured everything out. I cried a lot. He just listened patiently. I opened a bottle of wine, hoping it would give me the courage to face what was coming. We were sitting at the kitchen table, me with my tear-stained face and a glass of wine, Sam just looking at me with sad, kind eyes. I was trying to practice the words, "John, I love you, but I can't do this anymore." And right then, in the middle of my sentence, I heard a key in the lock. The front door opened. And there was John. A full day early. He stopped dead in the doorway, his carry-on bag still in his hand. He looked from me to the wine bottle to Sam. Then his eyes scanned the room, taking in the unmade bed visible down the hall, the big elaborate dinner cooking on the stove. His face, which had been smiling, hardened into something I had never seen before. It was a mask of pure fury. He didn't see a wife in crisis. He saw a crime scene. "What the hell is this?" he said, his voice dangerously low. Before I could even find my voice to explain, he dropped his bag and took a step forward, pointing a shaking finger at Sam. "What is he doing here?" "John, it's not what you think," I stammered, standing up. "I was upset. I just needed to talk to a friend." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "A friend? You cook a romantic dinner, get the bed ready, and drink wine with a friend while I'm gone. You think I'm an idiot. You're screwing him, aren't you?" The accusation hit me like a physical slap. It was so cruel, so far from the truth that it knocked the air out of my lungs. He couldn't imagine a world where my life, my crisis, wasn't about him or another man. In that second, all my fear and sadness curdled into pure, unadulterated panic. I couldn't speak. I couldn't defend myself. I just turned and ran. I fled to our bedroom and slammed the door, locking it behind me, my heart pounding against my ribs, as I heard his footsteps thundering down the hall right behind me. The door handle rattled violently. "Open this door. Who the hell is he? How long has this been going on?" John's voice was a roar I had never heard before. Raw and full of a kind of pain that had instantly turned to poison. I scrambled away from the door, pressing myself into the corner of the room, my hands over my ears. I could hear Sam's voice, faint but calm, trying to de-escalate. "John, you've got this all wrong. Let's just all calm down." Then I heard John shout something else, something ugly, and the sound of the front door slamming shut. And then silence. Sam was gone. I was alone in the house with this stranger my husband had become. He didn't stop. For what felt like an hour, he paced outside the bedroom, throwing accusations at the door. Every word was a confirmation of my deepest fear, that in his mind there was no possibility for my unhappiness that didn't involve another man. My career, my friends, my identity, none of it factored into his equation. The only variable he could see was infidelity. It was simpler for him. It made him the victim of a straightforward betrayal, not the cause of a complex and painful breakdown. I stayed locked in that room all night. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the floor leaning against the bed he thought I'd been planning to use with another man, and cried until I was empty. It wasn't just about the move anymore. It was about the fact that the man I had spent my life with didn't know me at all. He saw my desperate attempt to hold on to myself as a cheap, sordid affair. The thought was so insulting, so deeply wounding, it overshadowed everything else. The next morning I unlocked the door. The house was cold and still. The beautiful, complicated dinner I'd made in a panic was still sitting on the stove, untouched. John was at the kitchen table staring into a mug of coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His face was gray and haggard. He looked up as I walked in, his eyes full of hate. Finally ready to talk, he sneered. I took a deep breath, the fragile calm I'd built during the night threatening to shatter. There was nothing going on with Sam John. He's my friend. I was having a breakdown about you taking this job and asking me to move. I needed someone to talk to. Bullshit, he said, slamming his mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim. You're a liar. I saw it all. The unmade bed, the romantic dinner, the wine. You were waiting for me to be gone so you could play house with him. That dinner was for me, John. It was something to do so I wouldn't lose my mind with anxiety. The bed was unmade because I couldn't even face starting the day. My voice was rising, pleading with him to understand, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "So you're not going to admit it?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet again. I looked at his face, at the stubborn set of his jaw, and I knew it was useless. He had his story, and he was never letting it go. In that moment, the final piece of my resolve clicked into place. All the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sad certainty. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. But I will tell you this. I am not moving back to the East Coast. I am not giving up my life here." I looked him straight in the eye. "I would rather divorce you than move." The words hung in the air between us. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. I think for the first time he realized this wasn't just about Sam. But he couldn't let his narrative go. "So that's it. You're throwing away 31 years of marriage for your boyfriend." "I am throwing away 31 years of marriage for myself," I said, my voice cracking. "Because you are asking me to throw myself away for your career, and I won't do it anymore." That's when he saw my phone on the counter. He lunged for it before I could react. "Let's see what's on here then. Let's see your text with your friend." My blood ran cold. "John, don't." He was already swiping through it. "Aha, deleted messages. What are you hiding? You deleted all your messages with him, didn't you?" "Yes," I shouted, trying to grab the phone back. "I deleted them. After you threw him out of our house, I texted him to apologize. I texted our kids to tell them something awful was happening. I deleted them because I knew you would do this. I knew you would twist it into something ugly." But he just shook his head, a smug, bitter smile on his face. He saw it as a confession. It was the nail in the coffin of the story he'd already written in his head. Then he said the words I knew were coming. "That's it. I'm calling a lawyer." "Don't bother," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I already did." His head snapped up. The look on his face was pure shock, followed by a wave of incandescent rage. "You what?" "I retained Susan 2 weeks ago," I said quietly, naming our mutual friend of 15 years. That broke him. It was the one thing he couldn't rationalize. To him, this wasn't a desperate act of self-preservation. This was a long, calculated plan. A conspiracy. My panic, Sam, the dinner, it was all now part of a meticulous plot to ambush him. My retaining a lawyer wasn't a shield. It was a sword I'd been sharpening behind his back. He just stared at me, his eyes blank. All this time, he whispered, "You were planning this." He walked out of the kitchen, packed a bag, and left without another word. He sees me as a villain who cheated and plotted against him. His friends, his family, they'll all hear his version, and they'll believe it because it's a simple, easy story to understand. Betrayal is always easier to swallow than the messy, complicated truth that a 3-1-year marriage died because one person wanted a trophy and the other just wanted to exist. The truth is much sadder than his fiction. I'm not a cheater. I'm just a woman who, after a lifetime of packing boxes for someone else's dream, finally refused to be packed away herself. I don't know why I'm writing this, except that I feel like I'm going crazy. In my own home, you try your whole life to do the right thing, to be the responsible one, and this is what you get. This is the thanks. For 25 years, I have been the heart of this house. My older brother, he's the man of the house, sure, but what does that even mean? It's me who makes sure things run. It's me who takes care of our mother, my mother who is old and needs constant attention. It's me who raises my 2 children, who makes sure my husband has a clean shirt for work. I manage Mama's small government stipend, and let me tell you, stretching that money to cover her medicine and her special foods and everything else is a full-time job. It's a thankless, invisible job, and I do it every single day. Then my niece came back. We took her in, of course. She was 19 pregnant, and the father was nowhere to be found. She made a terrible mistake, and family is family. So we took her and her little girl in. We gave them a room, a roof, food. We gave them a safe place when she had brought shame on us. For a few years it was fine. She was quiet, grateful. She knew her place. But then she got this job. Some fancy office thing with a good salary. And everything changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. Suddenly, she wasn't the grateful little girl anymore. She was the one with the money, and she started acting like she owned the place. It started with the electricity bill. One day she just announced, "Don't worry about the electric anymore, Auntie, I've got it." It wasn't a question, it wasn't an offer. It was a declaration. It sounds nice, doesn't it? A big help. But it wasn't. It was a power move. Now every time I flip a light switch, I feel it. That little string she has attached to me, to all of us. It's not help, it's a leash. She pays the water bill sometimes too, whenever she feels like reminding us that she's the one keeping the taps on. Then she started with my children. She began giving them a weekly allowance. Behind my back at first. I only found out when my son came home with a new toy I knew we couldn't afford. When I asked him where he got the money, he said, "Cousin gave it to me." She gives my children money. My children. As if I'm not their mother. As if I can't provide for them. She's teaching them that she's the one to go to for things, not me. She's buying their affection and making me look like the mean mother who always says no because I have to budget and she doesn't. She is undermining me in my own home. Every day feels like a performance. She comes home from her important job dressed in her nice clothes and looks at us. She never says it, but I can see it in her eyes. The judgment. She looks at me managing the household chores. She looks at her uncle, my husband, tired after a long day of physical work, and I know what she's thinking. She thinks we're failures. She thinks we're stuck. Her success isn't a good thing for the family. It's a weapon she uses to make us feel small. It's a constant, silent reminder of everything we don't have. My home used to be my sanctuary, and now it feels like a prison where I'm being judged by my own blood. Yesterday it all blew up. It was the final straw. She came home from work and stormed into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner for everyone. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask about my day. She just stood there with her hands on her hips and said, "Why didn't you buy any fruit for Grandma?" Just like that. An accusation. In front of my kids, in front of my brother, she had the nerve to confront me, her elder, the woman who has been caring for our mother long before she was even born, about not buying fruit. As if I don't know what my own mother needs. As if I don't spend every waking hour thinking about her comfort. The stipend had to go to her prescription refill this week, something Her Highness wouldn't understand. Fruit was a luxury we couldn't afford right now. But trying to explain that to her is pointless. To her, it's not about money, it's about control. It's about her proving she knows better. I saw red. The disrespect, it was just breathtaking. My husband saw it. My brother saw it. They stood up for me. She needed to be put back in her place. She needed a dose of reality. For all her money and her fancy job, she needed to be reminded of who she is. She's the girl who got pregnant at 19 and came crawling back to us with nothing. So we told her. We reminded her. It was harsh maybe, but it was the truth. You can't just walk all over your family and expect them not to push back. She acts so high and mighty, but she's only living here because we took her in when she had no one else. And that's when the mask finally dropped. All that quiet, humble act she'd been playing for years just vanished, and the real her, the monster she'd been hiding, came out. "You think I need you?" she screamed. Her face was ugly with rage. "I pay for everything. I can walk out of here tomorrow and be fine. Can you say the same? Can any of you say the same?" She threw her money right in our faces. She said it. She finally said what we all knew she was thinking, that we were leeches, that we were nothing without her, that she could leave us all here to suffer and she wouldn't care. It was the cruelest, most hateful thing I have ever heard in my life. She stood there in the middle of our home and declared war on us. She stormed off to her room and slammed the door. We all just stood there, shaking. The air was thick and poison. A few minutes passed. My daughter went to the living room to watch something on the tablet, and my son went to his computer to play his game. Then I heard my daughter cry out, "Mom, the Wi-Fi isn't working." My son looked up from his computer, his face confused. "The internet's gone." We all knew. We knew instantly what she had done. It wasn't a technical problem, it was a punishment. It was a deliberate, calculated move to hurt us, to show us who was really in charge. I walked over to the router and saw the main light blinking orange instead of green. She had gone into her room, logged into the account that she paid for, and cut us off. Just like that. My brother slammed his hand on the table. "That little..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. That was it. The final undeniable proof. This wasn't about helping the family, this was about power. She took away the one thing my children use for their schoolwork, for their entertainment. The one thing we all use to connect to the world outside these four walls. She did it to be cruel. I marched to her bedroom door and banged on it with my fist. Not a polite knock. A hard, angry bang. "Open this door. Right now." Silence. I banged again, harder this time. "Did you hear me? You turn the internet back on. You don't get to do this in our house." The door opened a few inches. She stood there, not even looking scared. She looked calm. It made me even angrier. She wasn't yelling or crying. She just looked at me with those cold, judging eyes. "It's not times our times house, is it?" she said, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. "You all just reminded me of that. And it's not times our times internet. It's my internet. I pay the bill. I decide who uses it." My husband came up behind me. "Don't you talk to your aunt like that," he growled. "You live under our roof." She actually laughed. A short, bitter sound with no happiness in it. "Under your time's roof, I pay the electricity that keeps the lights on over this roof. I sometimes pay for the water that comes out of the taps. I buy half the groceries in this house because Mama's stipend doesn't cover it. So don't you dare talk to me about what you provide. Every word was a slap. She was saying it all out loud, laying it all out for everyone to hear. All the things I felt but never wanted to admit. She was turning her help into a list of our failures, reading them out loud right there in the hallway. "We took you in when you had nothing," I shouted, my voice cracking. I was losing control and she was perfectly still. "You were a pregnant child with nowhere to go. Have you forgotten that?" "No," she said, and her eyes finally showed something. It looked like pain, but it was gone in a second. "I haven't forgotten, but you seem to have forgotten that I'm not that child anymore. You can't hold that over my head forever. You don't get to treat me like dirt and then use my money to watch your shows." She looked past me at my kids, who were watching from the living room with wide eyes. "I'm sorry," she said to them, "not to us. But this is how it has to be for now." Then she closed the door in my face. Gently. Not a slam, but a soft click that felt louder and more final than any shout. I stood there shaking with a rage so deep I thought I was going to be sick. My husband and my brother were speechless. She had won. With a few quiet words and a changed password, she had taken all the power in the house and left us with nothing. The days that followed were hell. A cold, silent war. The house, which was always filled with noise, the TV, my kids playing games, music, was now horribly quiet. The silence was thick with anger. We didn't speak to her, and she didn't speak to us. She would leave for work in the morning before we were all up and come home late, going straight to her room with her own food. She was living here like a ghost. A ghost who paid the bills. My kids were miserable. They complained constantly. "Mom, I can't do my homework. Mom, I'm so bored. Can't you just ask her to turn it back on?" They didn't understand. They looked at me to fix it, and I couldn't. I was their mother, the one who was supposed to be in charge, and I was powerless. I felt like a failure in their eyes, and it was all her fault. She was poisoning my children against me, making me the bad guy, because I couldn't give them what she so easily took away. We tried to manage. I told my son he could use the library's computer after school. My husband tried to use his phone's data, but it ran out in 2 days. We were completely cut off. It felt like we were living in the dark ages. Every quiet evening was a reminder of what she had done. Every time my daughter sighed with boredom, it was another twist of the knife. The worst part was seeing my mother. Mama didn't understand the details of the fight, but she felt the tension. She would sit in her chair, looking from me to my niece's closed door, her face full of worry. "Why is everyone so angry?" she'd ask in her small voice. And I'd have to say, "It's nothing, Mama, don't you worry." But it was something. It was everything. My niece had shattered our family, and my poor mother was caught in the wreckage. I don't know what happens now. We're living with a stranger who holds all the cards. She proved her point. She proved that we do need her money. Hearing her say it was cruel, but living it is so much worse. She looks at us now on the rare occasions we cross paths in the kitchen, and there's no emotion on her face. It's like she's already moved out in her mind, and she's just waiting for her body to follow. She's not our family anymore. She's a landlord. A resentful one. And we are her tenants trapped in a home that doesn't feel like ours. She thinks she's the victim in all this. I know she does. But she's the one who held a knife to the heart of this family and twisted it. She declared war, and I don't see how any of us can win. My name is Mike. I'm 31, and if you're reading this, you've probably already heard my wife's version of the story. I'm sure I sound like a monster. The husband who cheated. The guy who planned to ruin her. I get it. From the outside it looks simple. But nothing is ever that simple. 5 years ago I married Sarah. We were a team. It was us against the world, building a life from scratch. We both worked, we split the bills, we talked about everything. When our son Leo was born 3 years ago, it felt like we had everything. He was this perfect little person we made together. We were solid. Then Sarah's career took off. She's brilliant, I've always known that, and she got a manager position at her firm. The money was great, better than I was making. At first I was her biggest cheerleader. I was so damn proud. I'd brag about her to my friends. That's my wife, I'd say. But slowly something started to change. We became she. Our life started to revolve around her job. Dinners out were always with her colleagues, and the conversation was always about her latest project, her team's success, her quarterly goals. I'd just sit there and nod the supportive husband. I went from being Mike to being Sarah's husband. At home, she'd walk in the door, drop her bag, and just vent about her day for an hour. Her stress, her deadlines, her annoying coworker. I'd listen, of course. That's what a husband does. But when I tried to talk about my day, about my job, her eyes would glaze over. It was like my life was too small to register on her radar. My world became about logistics. I was the one who had to leave work early if Leo was sick. I was the one who handled daycare pickup and drop-off because her schedule was too important. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was support staff. My own ambitions, my own problems, they all just seemed to fade into the background. She probably told you I've been distant and argumentative lately. She's not wrong. I was trying to fight for my place in our marriage. An argument was the only time I felt like she was actually looking at me, even if it was with anger. I was trying to claw my way back into the story of our life, but she was the only one holding the pen. The COVID lockdowns made it 100 times worse. She set up her office in our spare room, and her work life just took over our entire apartment. She was more powerful and present than ever, barking orders on Zoom calls, while I felt like I was shrinking in my own home. I was just the guy who had to keep a 3-year-old quiet so the important work could get done. That's when I met Chloe. It was early 2019 before the world shut down completely. She works at a coffee shop I used to go to near my office. She's 20. And before you judge, you need to understand it wasn't about her age or even about sex, not really. It was about being seen. When I talked to her, she actually listened. She'd ask me about my job, like it mattered. She laughed at my stupid jokes. She looked at me like I was a man, not just an accessory to a successful woman. With her, I felt like the main character for the first time in years. It was a relief. It was a pathetic, selfish relief, but it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. The fighting with Sarah got worse. It was always about something small, me leaving a dish in the sink or being 5 minutes late to pick up Leo. But it was never about the dish. It was about her thinking I wasn't pulling my weight, that I wasn't living up to the standards she had set for our life, or times her times life. Last week we had a really bad one. I don't even remember what started it. It ended with her saying something like, "I don't know what your problem is, but you need to figure it out. I don't have time for this." She went to bed and I just sat in the living room in the dark. I felt completely invisible. Empty. I opened my laptop and just started browsing online. I ended up on Quora on one of those "what's the most messed up thing you've ever thought about" threads. And I just started typing. It was like poison draining out of me. I wrote about the affair. I wrote about how trapped I felt. And then I started building a fantasy. A world where I wasn't the loser. A world where I was the one in control. I wrote out this whole crazy plan. What if I was the one who left? What if I could take Leo, drain our accounts, and leave her times with nothing? Who would win then? It was a power trip. A stupid late-night scream into the void. To make it feel more real, to make my fantasy of having power feel solid for just 1 second, I used our full names. Sarah's. Leo's. It was a horrible thing to do, but in that moment it made me feel like I had some control over a life that felt like it was spinning away from me. I finally finished writing around 3 a.m. and felt sick to my stomach, but also exhausted. I stumbled into bed and fell asleep. I didn't think about it again. The next morning felt normal. Too normal. I got up, made coffee, got Leo his favorite cereal. Sarah was in the shower getting ready for work. I left my laptop open on the kitchen island, still on that Quora page. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't a plan. It was just a stupid, careless mistake. Proof of just how tired and checked out I was. I was in Leo's room helping him put on his shoes when I heard the water in the shower turn off. A few minutes later, I walked back into the kitchen, ready to start the usual morning rush of getting everyone out the door. But it was quiet. Sarah was standing by the island, her back to me. She was still in her towel, her hair dripping onto the floor. She wasn't getting her coffee. She wasn't checking her phone. She was just standing there perfectly still, looking down at the open laptop. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. It was a physical thing pressing in on my ears. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet gurgle of the coffee maker. Sounds I'd never noticed before were now deafening in the absence of her voice. "Sarah," I said, and my own voice sounded wrong. She turned around slowly. Her face proud. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was just blank. Like a switch had been flipped, and all the light had gone out behind her eyes. That was 1,000 times scarier than if she'd been screaming. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt like a bug under a microscope. "Who's Chloe?" she asked. Her voice was flat, with no emotion at all. It was the voice she used on conference calls when a deal was going bad. Clinical, detached. My blood ran cold. The stupid, pathetic power fantasy was laid bare. My throat felt tight. "Sarah, listen. It's not what you think. I can explain." She held up a hand to stop me, a gesture so sharp and final it was like she'd slapped me. "No, you can't," she said, her eyes still locked on mine. "Because I read it. I read all of it." She glanced back at the screen. "You were going to drain the joint account. You were going to try and prove I was an unfit mother. You were going to take Leo." Each sentence was a hammer blow. "It was just a stupid post online," I said, my voice cracking. "I was mad. I was trying to. I don't know vent. It was a fantasy. It wasn't real. How do you explain that? How do you say I wrote that I wanted to destroy you and take our son because I feel so small and weak? It sounds insane. It sounds like the confession of a monster. She laughed, but it was a dead sound. It had no humor in it. A fantasy, Mike. You used our son's full name. You wrote down his life as a bargaining chip in your little revenge story. You fantasized about ruining me. About taking my child from me. The only thing you love more than your career, you wrote. She was quoting my own words back to me. That's not a fantasy. That's a plan. It wasn't a plan. I left the laptop open, for God's sake. If it was a plan, would I have done that? I don't know what you are anymore, she whispered, and that was what finally broke me. The anger drained away, and all that was left was shame. The man I married wouldn't even be capable of thinking these things, let alone writing them down for the whole world to see. She walked past me, pulling her towel tighter around her, and went into our bedroom. The door clicked shut. I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, feeling the whole world tilt on its axis. Leo called from his room, "Daddy, my shoe is on the wrong foot." I went to him on autopilot, my hand shaking as I fixed his sneakers. He was just a little kid babbling about his daycare friends, completely unaware that his family had just been blown apart in the next room. I hugged him, burying my face in his hair, smelling that little kid smell of shampoo and cereal. It was the most painful moment of my life. When I came out, Sarah was dressed. She had her work clothes on, her face was set like stone. She didn't look at me. "You need to leave," she said, her voice still eerily calm. "Sarah, please. Let's just talk." "There's nothing to talk about. I read your confession. I know about the affair. I know what you think of me. And I know what you plan to do to me and our son. Now I want you to pack a bag, and I want you to get out of my house. Asterisk. My time's house. Not our house." Just like that, it was over. I didn't argue anymore. What was the point? I went into the bedroom and threw some clothes into a duffel bag. She stood in the doorway and watched me, her arms crossed. Her expression never changed. She was watching a stranger, a threat. When I was done, I walked to the front door. Can I say goodbye to Leo?" She just nodded. I knelt down and gave him another hug. "I'll see you soon, buddy. Daddy just has to go away for a little bit." He didn't understand. He just hugged me back and said, "Okay, Daddy, see you later." I walked out the door without looking back. I couldn't bear to see her face again. The last week has been a blur. I'm staying in a cheap motel off the highway. It smells like old smoke and sadness. I tried calling and texting her for the first 2 days. Dozens of messages. "I'm sorry. Please, we can fix this. I love you. I miss Leo." I got no response. Then 3 days ago, I got an email. It wasn't from her. It was from a lawyer. A formal notice. She was filing for divorce and requesting an emergency custody order, citing the Quora post as evidence of my intent to cause harm and abduct our child. My sick, stupid fantasy, my scream into the void, was now Exhibit A in the destruction of my life. I haven't even tried to call Chloe. What would I say? The affair feels like it happened to another person in another lifetime. It was an escape, a symptom of the problem, but it wasn't the disease. The disease was in me. This bottomless pit of resentment and insecurity that made me feel like the only way to build myself up was to imagine tearing my wife down. I wrote that post to feel powerful, to feel like the protagonist in my own life, for once. And now I've never been more powerless. I sit in this motel room scrolling through old pictures of Sarah and Leo on my phone. Pictures from when we were a team. When I was a husband and a father, not just support staff. Not just a monster. I wanted to feel like I mattered. In trying to imagine a world where I couldn't lose, I lost everything. She saw me all right. She saw the absolute worst part of me, the part I didn't even know was there until I typed it out. And now that's all I'll ever be to her. I didn't want to destroy her. I just wanted her to see me. Now I have no one to blame but myself that she can't stand the sight of me. I'm sure you've heard my ex-husband's side of the story. He's very good at telling stories. He can make himself the hero of any situation, the calm, logical man betrayed by the hysterical, cheating wife. I know what I did was wrong. I will never say it wasn't. But a marriage doesn't just break. It gets worn down bit by bit until there's nothing left but a list of chores and two strangers sharing a mortgage. Our life wasn't bad. That was the problem. It was just empty. Tom was a great provider. He's a wonderful father, and he never missed a parent-teacher conference or a soccer game. But he stopped being my partner. He became my co-manager in the business of running our family. Our conversations were about logistics, who was picking up which kid, what needed to be fixed in the house, the plan for the weekend barbecue with his parents. I was the chief operating officer of our household. I managed the schedules, the meals, the social calendar. It was a full-time job on top of my actual full-time job, and I was good at it. But somewhere in all that managing, I disappeared. I wasn't a woman he wanted anymore. I was a system that was running smoothly. I tried to tell him. I can't count the number of times I sat on the edge of our bed after the kids were asleep and the house was finally quiet and said, "I feel so lonely," or "I miss us. I miss when we used to talk about things other than bills." He would look up from his laptop confused, like I just introduced a variable he hadn't accounted for. His solution wasn't to hold me or talk to me or plan a surprise date. His solution was to research. He went on Amazon and ordered books. Books with titles like Times, the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work Times, and Times Mating in Captivity, **. He left them on my nightstand as if our lack of intimacy was a leaky faucet that could be fixed with the right instruction manual. He'd read a chapter and then try to schedule sex like it was an agenda item. It was clinical. It was his way of trying to fix me to solve the problem of his unhappy wife. He never seemed to understand that I didn't want a project manager. I wanted a husband who actually saw me. And then there was Mark, my boss. It didn't start as anything scandalous. Mark saw me. At work, I wasn't just a mom or a wife. I was a professional with ideas and ambition. He'd ask my opinion on a big project and actually listen to the answer. Our lunches were filled with talk about the industry, about our frustrations, about our goals. He saw my mind first. He admired my work ethic. For the first time in years, I felt like a whole person, not just a collection of roles I was supposed to play. The friendship became the one place I could breathe. It was the one place I felt visible, and the loneliness at home was like a huge dark pit. Mark's attention was a light. I knew I was getting too close to the edge, but I was so desperate for warmth. The affair wasn't a plan, it was a collapse. One night after a brutal week at home and a huge success at work, we were the last two in the office celebrating a deal we'd closed. The conversation turned personal. I told him how invisible I felt. He told me he thought I was the most powerful, brilliant woman he'd ever met. And I just broke. It was a line I swore I would never, ever cross. But I did. For 2 years, I lived two lives. There was my home life where I was mom and household manager, making sure everything ran perfectly so no one would look too closely. And then there was my other life, a secret stolen world where I was a desired, intelligent woman. The lies were awful. They were a constant weight in my stomach. I wasn't trying to destroy my family. I swear I was just trying to survive the crushing emptiness of my life. I thought if I could just have this one thing for myself, this one place where I felt alive, I could keep everything else together. Tom must have sensed something was off, but his approach was exactly what I expected. He didn't try to get closer to me. He became a detective. He started making comments about how much I was on my phone. He'd ask who I was, texting his voice casual but his eyes sharp. Once he tried to grab my phone, laughing it off as a joke, but his fingers were tight. It felt like such a violation. He hadn't looked at times, really looked into my eyes to see how I was feeling in years. But he was more than willing to look through my private messages. He wasn't looking for his wife. He was looking for a problem to solve, a betrayal to confirm, so he could finally have an enemy to fight instead of a marriage to fix. I became more careful. I deleted messages. I kept my phone with me at all times. The stress was eating me alive, but I couldn't stop. I was in too deep. The weekends were the hardest. I'd paint on a smile for family outings, feeling like a complete fraud while Tom watched me with that cold, calculating look in his eyes. He stopped buying books and started watching me. Then last week I got careless. I had a second phone, a cheap one, mostly for work, but it's where Mark and I talked the most. It was an old one, and the battery life was terrible. I came home late from the office, exhausted, and plugged it in to charge in the kitchen, completely forgetting about it. I went upstairs, took a shower, and got ready for bed, my mind a million miles away. When I came back down for a glass of water, the kitchen was dark, except for the light from the hallway. Tom was standing there by the counter, perfectly still. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking down at something in his hand. It was the phone, its screen lit up. He held it like it was evidence. He didn't say a word, but in that awful, deafening silence I knew my two worlds were about to collide. How long? His voice was flat. Not angry, not hurt. Just empty. It was so much worse than yelling. I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. All the lies I had practiced, all the excuses I had ready, they all just evaporated. He was holding my whole secret life in his hand. I recovered the texts, Sarah. All of them. From months ago. I just needed to be sure. He set the phone down on the counter with a quiet click. 2 years. You've been lying to me for 2 years. I finally found my voice, but it was just a whisper. Tom, I can explain. Can you? He asked, still not looking at me. He just stared at the phone. "Can you explain it in a way that makes sense, because I've been trying?" For weeks, I thought maybe I was going crazy. But it turns out the logical explanation was the right one. He was treating it like an equation he'd finally solved. There was no emotion, just the cold satisfaction of being right. All I wanted was for him to scream at me, to cry, to throw something. Anything but this. This terrifying calm. He walked past me and went upstairs without another word. I heard our bedroom door click shut. I stood alone in the dark kitchen for what felt like hours, shaking. The next few days were a living hell. He was a ghost in our house. He spoke to the kids normally, but he looked right through me. He slept in the guest room. I tried to talk to him, to apologize, to beg. He'd just shake his head and say, "We'll talk when I'm ready." But he wasn't getting ready to talk. He was getting ready for war. I found out later he'd been talking to someone else the whole time, Mark's wife, Laura. They were comparing notes, building a case. My desperate attempts to connect were just noise to him while he was busy plotting my execution. The following weekend, I was supposed to meet Mark at a hotel downtown. It wasn't what it sounds like. It wasn't a romantic getaway. It was a meeting to end things. I was sick with guilt and fear, and I knew I had to break it off. I had to try to save my family. I walked into the lobby, my heart pounding, looking for Mark. Instead, I saw Tom. He was standing by the check-in desk, and he wasn't alone. Next to him was a man in a sheriff's uniform. For a second, my brain just stopped working. I couldn't process it. Tom looked at me, and his face was made of stone. He nodded at the sheriff, who took a step forward. "Are you Sarah?" the officer asked. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. He handed me a thick envelope. I just stared at it. It didn't feel real. People were watching. The receptionist, a couple waiting for the elevator. My private, personal hell was being staged for an audience. "Tom, please," I choked out tears, instantly blurring my vision. "What is this? Can we please just go home and talk?" "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think this is pretty clear. He didn't just want to divorce me. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted to break me in the most public way possible. That cold, calculating man who researched our marriage problems in books had researched the perfect way to destroy me, too. My affair was wrong, a terrible mistake born of loneliness. His revenge was cruel, a deliberate act designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain. In that moment, the man I had loved for 15 years became a stranger. A monster. The aftermath was a blur. I drove home, I don't even remember how, and collapsed. The next day, I resigned from my job. I couldn't face Mark, I couldn't face my colleagues. My entire world had been demolished. The first thing I did was find a therapist. I poured everything out, the loneliness, the affair, the public humiliation. She helped me see my own failings without letting me drown in shame. I was broken, but I wanted to get better. I begged Tom to come with me. "Please," I told him over the phone, my voice raw from crying. "Let's just try. For us, for the kids." I even bought a new copy of that stupid Times Mating in Captivity Times book he'd once left on my nightstand. A pathetic, desperate peace offering. No was all he said. It's too late for that. Of course it was. He didn't want to fix anything. He had already won. The divorce went through quickly. He was organized, efficient. It was like closing a business deal. I moved into a small, sterile apartment that smelled like new paint. The silence was the worst part. For years, I had craved a moment to myself, and now I was drowning in it. About a month after I moved out, a friend called. She was hesitant. "I don't know if I should be telling you this," she started, "but I saw Tom today. At the farmer's market." "Okay," I said, my stomach twisting. He wasn't alone. He was with a woman. And the kids? They looked like a family. I knew before she even said the name. It was Laura, Mark's wife, the woman he'd been collaborating with. It all clicked into place. Their late-night phone calls, their shared strategy, it wasn't just about getting revenge on their cheating spouses. It was an audition. He wasn't just tearing our family apart. He was building a new one from the wreckage with the only other person who could make him feel like the righteous betrayed victim. He didn't just move on. He moved into a life that was a mirror image of the one we'd had, just with a different wife. A better one in his eyes. One who was a victim just like him. He tells everyone he's finally happy that he escaped a toxic marriage and found someone who truly appreciates him. But I know the truth. This was never about his happiness. It was about winning. He couldn't fix our marriage, so he demolished it. He couldn't stand feeling like a failure, so he made sure I was the villain. And he stands there now, the hero of the story he so carefully wrote, built on the ashes of our family. I need to get this out. I know what she says about us. My husband and I've seen the whispers, the way people in town look at me in the grocery store. They think we're monsters. They think we threw our own daughter out into the cold. But they don't know. They don't know what it's like to see your child, your beautiful, brilliant child, standing on the edge of a cliff ready to jump and smiling while she does it. We gave her everything. I'm not saying that to sound spoiled, I'm saying it as a fact. We weren't rich, but she had a warm home, good food, new clothes for school every year. We paid for tutors. When she struggled in math, we drove her to every soccer practice. We clapped the loudest at her school plays. We had a plan. It was a good plan. She was smart. She was going to go to college. She wanted to be a teacher. We had brochures from state universities covering the coffee table. Her whole life was this bright, shining path right in front of her. Then one evening when she was 16, she sat us down in the living room and threw a grenade into our lives. "I'm pregnant," she said. Just like that. No tears, no fear, just a calm statement. And the boy, Jared. A nice enough kid, I suppose, but he had no future. He was working part-time at the auto parts store, thinking about community college maybe. They were children. My husband and I just stared at her. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every dream we had for her, every sacrifice we'd made, just evaporated. We saw her future, and it wasn't college dorms and a teaching degree. It was welfare checks, stained t-shirts, and the exhausted look of a parent who was still a child themselves. We tried to talk to her, to be rational. We talked about options. Not because we're evil, but because we wanted to hand her back her future. We wanted to give her a chance to be a kid for a few more years, to not let one mistake derail everything. She looked at us like we'd suggested murder. She called us cruel. She said she was keeping the baby and she and Jared were going to make it work. It was a fantasy. A childish, dangerous fantasy. We knew what would happen. We'd seen it before with girls in our town. The boy leaves, the girl drops out of school, and she spends the rest of her life struggling. We couldn't let that happen. We had to do something drastic. We had to show her what real life looked like. So we gave her an ultimatum. If she was adult enough to have a baby, she was adult enough to support it. If she wouldn't consider her options, she couldn't stay under our roof and pretend to be a child. We told her to leave. My God, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. I cried for a week straight after she walked out that door. We thought we prayed that a week or two out in the real world would shock her into understanding. We thought she'd come home. She didn't. She went to live with Jared and his parents. For a little while, we thought maybe, just maybe, this could work. At least she wasn't on the street. But then we started to hear things. This is a small town. People talk. A friend of mine who works at the clinic mentioned that Jared's older brother was back in town fresh out of rehab for heroin. He was living in that same house with our pregnant daughter. My husband and I went into a panic. We started asking questions quietly. We found out that Jared's own mother had a history. Years ago, she'd had a car accident and got hooked on painkillers. She was clean now, they said, but we know what that means. The devil is always just waiting at the door. Our daughter had taken her unborn child out of our safe, stable home and brought her into a house of addicts. Our blood ran cold. What were we supposed to do? What would any loving grandparent do? We called Child Protective Services. We told them our concerns. It wasn't to punish our daughter. It was to protect our grandchild. We were terrified. Of course, the caseworker came, looked around, and said everything was fine. They're good at hiding it, people like that. They know how to put on a good face for the authorities. But we knew. The baby was born. A little girl. We saw pictures through a mutual friend. She was beautiful. And our fear grew tenfold. We kept an eye on things. We heard she was working a retail job and was late picking the baby up from daycare a few times. We heard they'd have these big, loud family parties with strangers in and out of the house, and our granddaughter would be up way past her bedtime. Each story was a knife in our hearts. A baby needs routine stability, not a house full of chaos and past addictions. So we called CPS again. And again, every time we heard something that sounded wrong, we called. We were her only line of defense. They investigated and found nothing. They eventually fined us for making unsubstantiated claims. They punished times as asterisk. Us for trying to protect our own grandchild from a dangerous environment. The system completely failed her. Eventually we had to stop. The fine, the threats from the agency, our hands were tied. 5 years went by in a painful, silent blur. Then 6 months ago, my husband got the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him a year, maybe less. The first thing he said to me, his voice cracking, was, "I need to see her. I need to see my granddaughter." After all, the pain, all the anger, a dying man's wish is a powerful thing. I swallowed my pride, my hurt, everything. I found her number and I called. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I explained about her dad. I asked if we could please see them. There was a long silence on the other end, and then she said, "I'll meet you. Just you and Dad. Alone." Hope is a dangerous, fragile thing. We were so happy, we cried. We thought this was it. She was finally ready to listen, to understand that we only ever acted out of love. We bought a huge teddy bear for our granddaughter and a gift card to the bookstore. We were going to be a family again. We got to the coffee shop early. My husband was looking so frail, but he sat up straight, a nervous smile on his face. We picked a booth by the window. Every time the door opened, our heads would snap up. And then we saw her. She pushed the door open, the little bell chiming. She looked older, of course, but it was her. My heart leaped into my throat. She walked towards our table, her face like a stone mask. And she was completely, utterly alone. My husband reached a shaky hand across the table, trying to take hers, but she pulled back just enough that he missed. The gesture hung in the air between us, a pathetic failed attempt at connection. "Honey," he started, his voice thin, papery. We wanted to explain." She didn't say a word, just stared at us with those flat, empty eyes. It was like looking at a stranger. "We were so scared for you," I jumped in my voice, probably too loud for the quiet coffee shop. "You were just a baby yourself. And that house?" We heard things. About his brother, his mother. We were terrified. You and the baby were in danger. Every call we made to CPS, it wasn't out of spite. It was out of love. We were trying to protect our granddaughter. I waited for a flicker of understanding, a softening around her eyes. Nothing. She just sat there, her hands folded on the table. "Protect her," she finally said, her voice so low and steady it was chilling. "You mean terrorize us? Do you have any idea what that was like, to live in constant fear that a social worker would show up at our door because my own mother reported a messy living room she'd only heard about? Third hand, to have my daughter's daycare providers look at me with suspicion, Jared's. Parents took me in when you threw me out. They loved me. They gave me a home. And you repaid them by trying to have their grandchild taken away." "They were addicts," I said, my voice rising. "We couldn't let our grandchild be raised in that kind of environment." "Jared's brother was in recovery," she said, her voice never changing its calm, even tone. It was infuriating. "He was working the steps, going to meetings. He was the kindest uncle to my daughter. And Jared's mom, her history with pills, meant she was the first person to talk to me about postpartum depression. She was my biggest support. They were a family. A real one. They knew what it meant to struggle and to help each other. You wouldn't know anything about that." Every word was a slap. She was twisting everything, rewriting history to make us the villains and them the saints. "We were trying to do what was right," my husband whispered, looking defeated. "We may have done it wrong, but our hearts were in the right place. We love you." "No," she said, and that one word cut deeper than a knife. "You don't love me. You love the idea of me you had in your head. The daughter who went to college and did everything you planned. You couldn't handle the one who made her own choices." She looked directly at me. "You didn't want to protect my daughter. You wanted to be proven right. You wanted me to fail so I'd come crawling back and admit you knew best. The accusation was so monstrous, so unbelievably unfair that I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. Then she did something I will never forget. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of cash held together with a paperclip. She slid it across the table. "What is this?" I asked, confused. "It's for the fine," she said. "The one you had to pay for harassing us through CPS. I wanted to pay you back. I don't want to owe you anything." My husband just slumped in his seat, all the fight gone out of him. The money sat there between us, an insult uglier than any word she could have said. It was blood money. "My daughter," she continued, standing up, "has two wonderful, loving, and supportive grandparents. She doesn't need any more." She looked at my husband, and for a second I thought I saw a crack in her composure. But then it was gone. "I'm sorry you're sick, Dad." "I truly am." "But you too. You burned this bridge. You doused it in gasoline and lit the match yourselves." She turned and walked out of the coffee shop. She didn't look back. The little bell on the door chimed and she was gone, leaving us sitting there in silence with a pile of cash, an unopened teddy bear, and the ruins of our family. We drove home without saying a word. My husband went straight to bed, and he didn't really get out of it much after that. It was like she had taken the last bit of his life force with her when she walked out that door. The hope was gone. He got quieter, more distant. He stopped talking about the future. He just faded. He died 4 months later. In his sleep, he never saw his daughter again. I am alone now. The house is so quiet. I spend my days trying to understand. How could a child be so cruel? How could she sit there in front of her dying father and choose her anger over a final moment of peace? Sometimes a friend will show me a picture of her on social media. She's smiling. Her daughter, my granddaughter, is 10 now. She has my husband's eyes. They look happy. And a bitter, angry part of me thinks times of course they look happy, asterisk. She got what she wanted. She cut us out, erased us, and built her perfect little life on top of our broken hearts. She will never understand that everything we did, every horrible, painful decision came from a place of desperate love. We saw a fire and we tried to pull her from it. She thinks we were the ones holding the match. She lays in the bed she made. No, we all do. And mine is a bed of heartbreak made by a child who refuses to understand what real love looks like. And it's the loneliest bed in the world. I'm the wife. The one who cheated. You've probably heard my husband's version, and I'm sure I sound like a monster. Maybe I am. But things are never as simple as one person being good and the other being bad. Our story started falling apart long before I ever sent that first text message. It started with the house. It was supposed to be our dream, the place where we'd raise our family and grow old. Instead, buying it nearly broke us. The stress was unbelievable, a constant grinding weight on both of us. We were fighting about money, about paint colors, about everything. The joy was just gone, replaced by this shared anxiety. I thought another baby would fix it. I remembered how happy we were after our daughter was born, how we felt like a team. I thought a second child would bring that feeling back, that purpose. When I brought it up, my husband looked at me like I'd asked him to climb a mountain. He said he had reservations. He talked about money and the stress of the new house. It was the first time I felt like my dream for our family was something I had to sell him on, like a timeshare. But I pushed, and eventually he agreed. The moment I saw that positive pregnancy test, I felt a rush of hope. But when I showed it to him, his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was there for a second, then it vanished, and he confessed he had this nagging dread he couldn't shake. That dread became a wall. He didn't build it brick by brick. He just built it overnight. He decided the only way to deal with his fear was to get a new, better-paying career. And just like that, he was gone. He enrolled in a bunch of online courses and locked himself in his study. He says we still had dinner together, and technically we did. But he wasn't there. He was a ghost at the table, staring through me, his mind on coding or project management or whatever it was he was studying. I tried to talk to him about my day, about our toddler, about the new baby kicking, and he'd just nod, give a one-word answer, and you could tell he was just waiting for me to stop talking so he could go back to his computer. I was dealing with a moody 2-year-old, a high-risk pregnancy that left me exhausted and sick, and a new house that still felt like a construction zone. I was drowning, and my husband was in the other room with noise-canceling headphones on. I have never ever felt so alone in my entire life. I tried to get his attention. I tried to feel like a person again. I'd take long baths, put on a nice dress, do my makeup. I was trying to feel like the woman he fell in love with, not just a tired pregnant mom. He either didn't notice at all or he'd get this suspicious look on his face. "Who are you getting dressed up for?" he'd ask, not like a compliment, but like an accusation. I wasn't just losing my husband. I was disappearing. Then someone at work saw me. He's older, married, and a manager in another department. It started so innocently. He just listened. He'd ask how my weekend was and actually stick around to hear the answer. He noticed when I got a haircut. He told me my new maternity dress looked nice on me. It was like getting a drink of water after walking through a desert for months. I didn't realize how thirsty I was for a little bit of attention, for someone to just see me as a human being. It started with friendly chats, then we started texting. Stupid things at first, jokes and complaints about work. But his texts made my heart beat faster. They were a bright spot in my gray, lonely days. It felt good to have a secret, something that was just for me. For the first time in so long, I felt interesting and alive. I know what you're thinking. And yes, it went further. A lot further. Was it wrong? Of course it was. It was a terrible, reckless thing to do. It was an escape. It was a fantasy where I was the main character, where I was wanted and exciting. My husband was upstairs studying for a future I felt no part of, and I was downstairs on my phone building a temporary world where I wasn't just a household appliance. The other man would give me little assignments, things like, "Wear the green dress tomorrow," or "Tell me about your first kiss." It sounds weird, I know, but it was a game. And it was intoxicating because it was all about me. For a few hours I wasn't a neglected wife or a vessel for a baby my husband seemed to resent. The first time we met at a hotel, I was so nervous I almost threw up. But in that room, I wasn't a mom. I wasn't pregnant. I was just a woman being desired. It was a fantasy, but it was the only thing that was keeping me from completely breaking down. The fantasy came crashing down when my husband found the messages on my social media. The look on his face, I will never forget it. He was broken and I had broken him. He kept asking why. Why? But how could I explain it? How could I say, because you checked out? Because you made me feel invisible. Because your dread for our new baby made me feel like I was a burden. It would have just sounded like excuses. It would have sounded like I was blaming him. So I gave him the simple answers. I told him it was the pregnancy hormones, that I was stupid, that it was a mistake and it meant nothing. It was easier than trying to explain the slow, quiet death of our marriage. I promised to end it. And I meant it. I really, truly wanted to fix my family. I cut off all contact with my coworker. I focused on my husband. For a few weeks we tried. He came out of his study. We went on dates. We took our daughter to the park. It was like we were acting out a play of what a happy family looked like. But it felt so fragile, like one wrong word would shatter everything. But the affair wasn't just physical. It was an emotional habit, a crutch I had relied on for months. I felt like I couldn't just ghost him and move on. I needed to see him one last time, to say a real goodbye, to close that chapter completely, so I could truly focus on my marriage. I needed closure. I know how that sounds, but it felt true to me. It felt necessary. I knew my husband wouldn't understand. His trust in me was a thread, and asking to go see the man I cheated on him with would snap it instantly. So I lied. I told him I had a one-night business trip for work, a last-minute training seminar an hour away. It was a stupid, panicked decision. As I packed an overnight bag, my hands were shaking. I felt sick with guilt, but I told myself it was for the greater good. One last lie to end all the lies. After this, I could finally be the wife and mother my family deserved. I just had to get through this one night. I drove to the hotel, met him, and ended it for good. The whole drive home, I rehearsed what I would say to my husband, how our new life would start tomorrow. I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. I had done it. I pulled into our driveway, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The house was quiet. He was sitting on the couch in the living room, with all the lights off except for the glow of his phone screen. He didn't look up when I came in. The air was cold and heavy, and in that moment I just knew something was terribly wrong. "How was the trip?" he asked, without looking up from his phone. His voice was completely flat. It was the kind of quiet that's louder than screaming. All the relief I had felt on the drive home evaporated. "It was fine," I said, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. Long, tiring. I started taking things out of my overnight bag, trying to act normal, trying to pretend the air in the room wasn't thick enough to choke on. "Good seminar?" he asked. The question just hung there. He still hadn't looked at me. "Yeah, you know, corporate stuff." I was rambling. My heart was pounding in my chest. He knew. I didn't know how, but he knew. He finally looked up from his phone, and his eyes were hollow. There was no anger in them yet, just a chilling emptiness. "That's funny," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Because your work doesn't have a seminar scheduled for tonight." I called them. My blood ran cold. Of course he had. He had been stewing here all night, checking, verifying, building his case against me. My lie was so thin, so stupid. "And that's also funny," he continued, standing up and walking towards me, "because location sharing is still on." He turned his phone around so I could see the screen. It was a map. A map with a neat, tidy blue line showing my car's journey from our house to a hotel downtown and then back home. Not to the conference center, an hour away where I had claimed to be. The floor felt like it dropped out from under me. I had nothing. No more lies, no more excuses. I was ending it, I whispered the words, feeling pathetic and small. I swear. I went there to tell him it was over for good. I needed to do it in person. I needed closure so I could come home to you and be done with it all. He laughed. It was a horrible, bitter sound that had no humor in it. Closure. You lied to my face. Packed an overnight bag and went to a hotel with the man you cheated on me with, and you call it closure. He was shouting. Now the emptiness in his eyes replaced by a firestorm of rage and pain. You think I'm that stupid? You think I'm that much of a fool? It's the truth, I cried, tears streaming down my face. I know how it looks, but I am telling you the truth. It's over. I ended it tonight. He stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked like he was searching for a single reason to believe me, but couldn't find one. Then a new, cruel kind of calm settled over him. Okay, he said. Okay. If it's really over, you won't mind proving it. He pointed to my phone, which I had set on the kitchen counter. Pick it up. Text him right now. Tell him your husband knows everything and that you can never speak to him again. Let's see what he says. I froze. It felt like a trap. A test I was designed to fail. This wasn't about truth. It was about power. He wanted to watch me, to control the narrative, to humiliate me. He wanted to see me perform my repentance for him. My affair was born out of feeling invisible and powerless. And here he was in the most critical moment trying to make me his puppet. No, I said, my voice barely audible. What, he snarled. Why not? If it's over, what's the problem? Because this isn't about us fixing things, I said, a new kind of strength, a desperate, cornered animal strength rising in me. This is about you punishing me. This is a game and I won't play. So you're protecting him, he spat, the accusation dripping with venom. After everything, you're still protecting him. He lunged for my phone, but I was faster. I snatched it off the counter and held it to my chest. It was a reflex. It wasn't about the other man. It wasn't even about the messages. It was about saying, you don't get to control this. You don't get to control me. It was the last piece of myself I had left, this one final act of defiance, and I clung to it. His face crumbled. Seeing me clutch the phone like a lifeline was his answer. To him it was a confession. It was proof that I was still in it, that I had chosen the affair over him, over our family. The hope I had seen flickering in his eyes just moments before died completely. He looked at me as if I was a complete stranger, a monster who had taken his wife's place. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It was the sound of our marriage taking its last breath. He just shook his head slowly, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He didn't say another word to me. He walked past me, went upstairs, and I heard the drawers of our dresser opening and closing. A few minutes later, he came down with a duffel bag. He walked to the front door without a glance in my direction, opened it, and left. The click of the lock echoed in the silent house. I stood there in the kitchen for I don't know how long, phone still clutched in my hand until my legs gave out, and I slid down to the floor. It was over. My stupid, desperate attempt to get the closure I thought I needed had destroyed the one thing I was trying to save. I had lied to end the lie. And in doing so, I had burned the whole world down. He thinks he caught me cheating a second time. That's the story he'll tell everyone, and that's what they'll all believe. They'll see my refusal to give him my phone as the ultimate proof of my guilt. But the truth is, he had already decided I was guilty. The phone wasn't a tool for finding the truth. It was a weapon to confirm his worst fears. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted a confession. He wanted to win. He never once asked me why I was so lonely I would look for comfort in another man's arms. He never asked what it felt like to manage a toddler, a house, and a high-risk pregnancy while he hid in his study building a future I wasn't sure I was part of. He only ever asked, "Why would you do this to me? It was never about us. It was about him." Snatching that phone was the last selfish thing I did. But it was also the first thing I did for myself in a long time. I refused to let my messy, complicated, painful story be reduced to a text message in his cruel little test. He thinks he caught a cheater. All he really did was prove he never saw me at all. And now he never will again. I know what you probably think of me. You've probably read my husband's version of the story. I'm the cheating wife, the monster who blew up 2 families. And I'm not here to say I'm innocent. What I did was wrong. But the story you heard isn't the whole story. It's the neat, clean version where he's the victim and I'm the villain. The truth is so much messier than that. From the outside, we had everything. A beautiful house and a nice neighborhood, 2 great kids, and a social life people would kill for. Our best friends lived just down the street. It was my husband and me, and him and his wife. The 4 of us. We did everything together, holidays, barbecues, family vacations. We were that perfect happy foursome you see in commercials. People told us all the time how lucky we were. But inside our house, when the guests left and the kids were asleep, there was just silence. A huge, empty quiet. My husband is a good man. I need you to understand that. He's a wonderful father and a great provider. He fixed things around the house. He made sure the bills were paid. He bought me a reliable car. He did all the things a husband is supposed to do. But somewhere along the line, he stopped seeing me. I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was a project he had completed. The wife was secured, the kids were healthy, the house was running smoothly. Check, check, check. He could move on to his hobbies. Our conversations became transactions. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Can you take a look at the dishwasher? It's making a weird noise. Parent-teacher conferences are on Thursday. I would try to talk about my day, about my work, and he'd nod along his eyes, already drifting back to his phone or the TV. He'd say, "That's great, honey," but if I asked him a question about what I just said, he wouldn't have a clue. My job was the only place I felt like myself. I work for the school district in administration. It's not glamorous, but I love it. I believe in public education, in making things better for the kids in our community. I was good at it too. I was passionate and driven, and I was on track for a huge promotion, a director position I had been working towards my entire career. My husband was supportive in the way you support a kid's soccer league. He was proud, but he didn't get it. He didn't understand the late nights, the policy debates, the fire in my belly to fix a broken system. His best friend did. Let's call him Mark. Mark was on the Board of Education. He was just as passionate as I was. He saw the same problems I saw from a different angle. Our kids were friends, our wives were friends, we were all one big, happy family. At first, our texts were just about work. Did you see the latest proposal on the funding gap? What are your thoughts on the new curriculum standards? It was innocent, but it was also like a drug. For the first time in almost a decade, someone was talking to my brain. Someone saw me as a smart, capable professional, not just a mom who coordinates carpools. The texts became more frequent. Hundreds a day. My husband wasn't wrong about that. They started in the morning and ended late at night. We'd be at a family dinner, the four of us, and he and I would be texting under the table about something that happened at a committee meeting. It was our secret world, a place where I felt smart and funny and seen. I felt alive. I wish I could tell you there was a specific moment when the line was crossed, a single decision that I could point to and say, that's where I went wrong. But it wasn't like that. It was a slow, agonizing slide. It was a conversation that went a little too late. A shared look across the dinner table that lasted a little too long. It was the crushing loneliness in my own bed, knowing that just a few houses away was someone who actually understood me. The affair wasn't about sex. It was about turning to the only person who was offering a hand when I felt like I was drowning. The guilt was immediate and suffocating. We were destroying everything. We knew it. We weren't monsters who didn't care. We were two people who had made a terrible mistake and were terrified of the consequences. We loved our spouses not in the way we should have maybe, but we still cared for them as the parents of our children, as people we had built lives with. We couldn't stand the thought of hurting them, of shattering our kids' worlds. That's why we started seeing a therapist together. My husband found the emails about our appointments and assumed the worst, that we were plotting our grand escape. The truth is, we went there because we were lost. We sat on that couch and asked a stranger, how do we fix this? How do we tell the truth in a way that causes the least amount of pain? Our plan wasn't to come up with some other reason to divorce. It was to find the strength to confess and to manage the explosion we knew was coming. We were trying so stupidly to do the wrong thing the right way. We were still trying to figure it out when my husband confronted me. I came home from work one evening and he was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. He just looked at me. There was no sadness in his eyes, no tears, just a coldness I had never seen before. It was sharp and calculating. He said, I know. I read your emails. My world stopped. I started to cry, to apologize, but he held up a hand to stop me. He wasn't interested in my tears. He told me he'd gotten a call from a furious friend of his, someone who knew both of us who had found out about the affair. He said this friend was disgusted and was planning to go to the next public Board of Education meeting and expose everything. My affair with Mark, a sitting board member. My name, my job, my pending promotion, all of it aired out for the whole town to see. The panic that hit me was unlike anything I've ever felt. It was pure, ice-cold terror. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was my career. My entire professional life, everything I had worked for since I was 22, was about to be burned to the ground in a public spectacle. I called Mark sobbing, barely able to get the words out. He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and then he said he would handle it. He said he wouldn't let them destroy me. A few hours later, he called me back. He had gone straight to the superintendent and the board president. He confessed to everything and resigned his position, effective immediately. He thought by getting ahead of it, by controlling the story, he could save my career. He thought he was falling on his sword to protect me. He was a hero. In his own mind and in the eyes of his wife and the few people who knew the real story, he'd done the noble thing. He'd sacrificed his reputation to save mine. But it didn't work. The very next morning, I got a call from my boss, the superintendent. I could hear the pain in her voice. She was a friend, someone I'd worked with for years. She told me she was sorry, so deeply sorry, but with Mark's public resignation citing an inappropriate relationship with a district employee, there was no way the board could approve my promotion. It was over. Just like that. The job I had spent a decade working towards was gone. The days that followed were a blur of shame and chaos. News travels fast in a small town. Even though Mark never used my name, people connected the dots. I had been his biggest champion in the district, the front-runner for a job he would have had to approve. Whispers followed me in the grocery store. Parents at my kids' school would stop talking when I walked up. Mark's wife, my friend, left him. She called me once, her voice raw with a kind of grief I couldn't even imagine, and just said, "How could you?" before hanging up. Our perfect foursome was a pile of rubble. Through it all, my husband was quiet. He watched me fall apart with a strange detachment. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't crying. He just moved around the house like a ghost, his presence a constant cold weight. I thought he was in shock, processing his own pain. I kept trying to apologize, to explain, but he'd just shake his head and walk away. He was letting the consequences of my actions wash over me, letting me drown in the mess I had made. I thought it was his way of coping, of letting me feel the full impact of what I'd done to him. I was so wrong. About a month later, the storm had passed, leaving behind a dead, silent landscape. Mark had moved out of his house. The for sale sign in their yard was a daily reminder of the lives I'd ruined. I was still going to work, but my job felt hollow. I was a pariah. At home, my husband and I barely spoke. We were just two people sharing a mortgage, navigating around each other in the kitchen. One night, I was cleaning up after dinner, and he was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone just like he always used to. The silence was suffocating me. I finally just said, "Are we ever going to talk about this? About us? What happens now?" He looked up from his phone, his expression completely blank. "What's there to talk about?" he said. Everything I said, my voice cracking. I know I destroyed everything. I hate myself for it. But the way you found out, that friend who was going to expose us, it was horrible, but maybe it was for the best. It forced everything out into the open. He put his phone down and looked at me. For the first time in weeks, he really looked at me. And then he said the words that changed everything. "There was no friend," he said, his voice as calm as if he were telling me the weather. I made him up. I just stared at him. It didn't register at first. "What? What are you talking about?" "The furious friend," he said, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "The one who was going to the board meeting." There was no one. That was me. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had to grip the counter to keep myself from falling. All the pieces started snapping into place, forming a picture so monstrous I couldn't bear to look at it. He hadn't just reacted in a moment of pain. He had seen my panicked emails about finding a therapist. He knew what I had done. And instead of confronting me, instead of yelling or screaming or demanding a divorce, he had waited. He had sat with that knowledge, and he had thought. He had planned. He knew what mattered to me most outside of our children. He knew my career was my identity, the one thing that was truly mine. And he built a weapon out of it. He invented a threat so specific, so catastrophic that he knew it would trigger the exact chain of events that followed. He knew Mark would try to protect me. He knew Mark would confess. And he knew that confession would cost me my promotion. He didn't just want to hurt me back. He wanted to dismantle me. He wanted to burn down the one part of my life that he had never been able to touch. The affair was my fault. I own that. What I did was a betrayal, and it was wrong. But his revenge, that was something else entirely. It was a cold, a hurt person lashes out. A cruel person lays a trap and patiently waits for you to walk into it. He hadn't just discovered the affair. He had orchestrated its fallout with the precision of a surgeon. He watched me sob in terror over a threat that only existed in his head. He watched my professional life go up in flames and didn't say a word. We are still living in the same house. For the kids. That's the excuse we use. But the quiet emptiness I felt before is gone. It's been replaced by something much worse, a thick, choking tension. I look at him now, and I don't see the man I married, the provider, the good father. I see a stranger. A man who is capable of sharpening a knife in silence and sliding it into my back, not out of rage, but out of a desire for perfect, quiet revenge. I broke our marriage, but he salted the earth. He didn't just want to end our relationship, he wanted to make sure I would have nothing left when it was over. He wanted to destroy the person I was without him, so I would be forced to remember that my biggest mistake wasn't just having an affair. It was underestimating the cold, patient fury of the man I had stopped seeing. I need to tell my side of the story. I know what she's been saying about me at work to the landlord, to anyone who will listen. She paints me as some crazy old monster, but she doesn't tell people the whole truth. She leaves out the parts that make her look bad, and she has no idea what was really going on in my life. My life has not been easy. You get to be my age, nearly 60, and you start to become invisible. The world belongs to young people, and you're just there. The bills get bigger every year, but the paycheck doesn't. The house gets quieter. My husband passed away years ago, and my kids are grown with their own lives hundreds of miles away. The silence can be deafening. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a heavy, lonely quiet that presses down on you. When she needed a place to stay, it felt like an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was saying. She was just a kid, really 23, and new at the company. So quiet and shy. I saw a bit of myself in her from a long, long time ago. I thought this was my chance. I wasn't just getting a roommate to help pay the mortgage. I was getting a chance to have a family again, even a small, strange one. I thought I could help her, guide her a little bit. She seemed so lost. I imagined us making dinner together, watching TV on the couch, talking about our shifts. I was so excited to have that life in the house again, someone to look out for. That dream fell apart almost immediately. The quiet I thought was shyness was actually a fortress. She would come home from work, go straight to her room, and shut the door. I I wouldn't see her again until the next morning. It was like living with a ghost. I tried so hard to break through. I'd knock on her door in the morning with a cup of coffee just to say hello and start the day on a friendly note. She'd look at me like I was an intruder, like I'd just broken into her house. The look on her face, it made me feel like a creep. I tried to establish some simple house rules, the kind of things that make a house a home. I asked her to please keep the living room curtains open during the day. It's a dark room, and the sunlight makes it feel so much more cheerful and alive. I also asked if she could just tidy up her things when she was done in the common areas. A coffee mug on the table, a jacket on the chair, no big deal, but it adds up. These weren't demands. I was trying to say, let's both take pride in the space. Let's build a nice home together. She just looked at me with those cold eyes and said no. She said she liked her privacy and didn't want the neighbors looking in. She treated every suggestion like a personal attack. I wasn't her housemate. I was just the landlord she had to put up with. The worst part was the money. It was humiliating. An unexpected car repair came up and it completely wiped me out. I was a few days from payday and I was short $100 for the electric bill. I was sick with worry. I finally got up the nerve to ask her if I could borrow it just for a couple of days. I thought, this is what you do for people you live with. You help each other out. The way she looked at me with this mix of pity and disgust, I've never felt so small in my life. She said no, that she wasn't comfortable with it. It wasn't about the money. I would have paid her back the second my check cleared. It was the message she sent. You are not my family. You are not my friend. You are a problem. A week later, I was stuck on a conference call for work that was running late, and I needed cash for groceries on the way home. I texted her and asked if she could possibly run to the ATM for me with her card, and I'd pay her back for the fee and everything as soon as I got home. It would have taken her 10 minutes. She just replied, "No, sorry." No explanation. Just no. She didn't trust me. She saw this desperate old woman and probably thought I was going to drain her account. That refusal stung more than anything. It proved she thought the absolute worst of me. I felt like I was going crazy because sometimes she would do something that seemed kind, but it always felt like it had an edge to it. One day I came home from a double shift, completely exhausted, and she had done my laundry. It was all folded in a basket on the living room couch. I was so touched I almost cried. But then it just sat there. For a whole day. It was this silent monument to her one good deed. I was working all the time. My back was killing me, and I texted her and asked, "Hey, I know you're upstairs. Would you mind just bringing that basket up for me? I'm so tired." She never even replied. The laundry just sat there. It felt passive-aggressive. Like she was saying, "I did this one nice thing for you, now you owe me, and I'm not lifting another finger." I was drowning, and she was standing on the side of the pool, watching. I'd call her when she was out sometimes, just to see when she'd be home, just to know there would be another human being in the house with me that night. She told me I was suffocating her. I wasn't trying to suffocate her. I was the one who couldn't breathe. The loneliness was suffocating me, and she was my only lifeline. A lifeline that didn't want to be touched. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence, the rejection, the feeling of being a guest in my own home. I finally hit my breaking point. I sat on my bed, my hands shaking, and I typed out a text. It wasn't an eviction. It wasn't an attack. It was a cry for help. I thought maybe if she thinks she's going to have to move, she'll finally talk to me. Maybe she'll finally ask what's wrong. I wrote, "I don't think this is working out." I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart pounding. All I wanted was for her to write back and say, "Why? Let's talk about it." I just wanted to fix it. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't completely alone. I hit send. And then I waited. Her reply came through a few minutes later. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer to talk. It was just 2 words. "I agree." That was it. My heart just sank into my stomach. I had held out this little bit of hope that she would see my text for what it was, a desperate plea. Instead, she just slammed the door in my face. There was no fixing this. There was nothing to even talk about. She wanted out. The wall of ice she had built between us was never going to come down. I felt so stupid, so naive. I had imagined a family, and she had just been counting the days until she could get away from me. The next day, she was gone. I came home from work to a house that was quieter than it had ever been. The silence was different this time. It wasn't just lonely, it was angry. Her bedroom door was wide open, and the room was bare. She hadn't just moved out. She had erased herself. And she had done it like a thief in the night, without even the decency of a goodbye. I walked into the living room and flicked the light switch. Nothing. I tried another lamp. Nothing. The power was on, but the TV wouldn't turn on, and my phone wasn't connecting to the internet. I went over to the modem and saw the empty space where it used to be. The lights were blinking on the box, but the cord was gone. She had taken it. She had canceled the Wi-Fi and the cable services that were in her name, sure, but she knew I needed them. I work from home half the time. How could she be so cruel? To just cut me off from the world like that, without a word of warning. It was a final parting shot designed to hurt me as much as possible. I went to the kitchen to get a drink, and even the ice cube tray was gone from the freezer. It was so petty, so childish. It was all over a disagreement about curtains and asking her to bring my laundry upstairs. The fallout was a complete nightmare. She had left a few things behind a box of old videotapes that had belonged to her dad, she'd once told me. They seemed important. I texted her to come get them. I just wanted this to be over. She refused to come to the house alone. She said she'd only come with a landlord present. She was manipulating the whole situation, painting me as some kind of threat, someone she was afraid of. Me, a 60-year-old woman who just wanted a little companionship. A few days later, she got her way. I was sitting on the back porch, on the phone with my boss, trying desperately to explain why I'd been so distracted and off my game at work. The stress was eating me alive. And then I saw them through the sliding glass door. It was her and the landlord creeping around my house like I was a criminal. She was pointing at things, talking in a low voice. She took him into her old room, which she had, of course, left spotless, probably cleaner than it ever was when she lived there. She was putting on a show, making herself look like the perfect responsible tenant who had escaped a crazy old landlady. The landlord didn't even bother to hear my side of the story. He came out onto the porch, his face set like stone, and handed her back her full security deposit right there in front of me. It was a slap in the face. It was him saying, "I believe her. You're the problem." I just stood there speechless. She took the check, grabbed her box of tapes, and walked out of my life without even looking at me. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. An hour after she left, my boss called me back. He said my performance had been declining for weeks, that they needed someone more focused. He was letting me go. I was fired. On the exact same day that she finalized her escape. She hadn't just moved out. She had detonated a bomb in the middle of my life and walked away without a single scratch deposit in hand. The stress she put me through, the constant feeling of rejection in my own home, the sleepless nights, it all led to this. I lost my roommate, my dignity, and my job all at once. The worst part is what came after. I found out from an old coworker, one of the few who still talks to me, what she's been saying. She's telling everyone I was trying to steal from her. That I'm unstable. She took my loneliness, my desperate attempts to connect, and twisted them into something ugly and scary. She's the victim in her story. The poor young girl who escaped from the clutches of the crazy old woman. She didn't see a lonely person desperate for a family. She saw a mark. She used me for a cheap room, and when my problems, my real human problems, became inconvenient for her, she threw me away and ruined my life in the process. She wasn't just a quiet girl who wanted her privacy. She was cold and calculating. She took the little flicker of hope I had for a life with less silence, and she stomped it out. Now the silence is all I have left. And it's louder than ever.